Audiobook by Fate's Reader. Don't forget to subscribe and like the channel for more epic series. Drop your recommended novel below. We love to know what you want to hear next. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 641, Power of the Divine Ring. Qin Mu could execute heaven and earth Madra not because of the overlord body, but because of one sentence that first ancestor had said, and that sentence was, "You and I are the same, orphans of Qin family." Hearing these words made him feel the same, and his frame of mind resonated with first ancestor. He could experience the destruction of founding Emperor era, and as the only orphan of Qin family in this world, he could feel the helplessness as he carried up this heaven and earth by himself. This kind of feeling was how first ancestor felt, and that was also how he felt. Not only that, first ancestor wanted to carry founding Emperor era and not let the era be wiped out. What Qin Mu wanted to carry was the world today, the era of eternal peace. Eternal peace may look safe now, and the people might be living happily, but Qin Mu knew very well that danger was creeping in step by step, the devil race of Supreme Emperor Heaven, the stone statues in the territory of eternal peace, the fake sky, and high heavens that was above West Earth. Even the remaining survivors of Crimson Light were also a threat. Eternal Peace era just had to expose the slightest clue, and they could be wiped out at any moment. Eternal peace of this new era that was just born was already shaking in the wind and rain. Everything could flip around and be destroyed. It was this kind of mental state that had allowed him to unleash the power of first ancestors' heaven and earth Madra. Under the power of the Madra skill, Qin Mu was not only a stabilizing force, but he was also more of a stable pillar that could hold up heaven and earth. What he wanted to do was to put an end to that invisible disaster, not allowing history to repeat itself. Even though he had this dim and depressed mental state, he didn't have the dispirited emotion that was on first ancestor human emperor. They were both heaven and earth Madra, but in his Madra, there was a spirit that was rousing vigorously and becoming stronger in the face of disaster. This was what was different from first ancestor human emperor. This was also the reason why first ancestor human emperor couldn't help becoming stunned when turned around and saw Qin Mu's Madra. Qin Mu executed one move after another move of his heaven and earth Madra. First ancestor human emperor's Madra skill was different from all of the other Madra that Qin Mu had seen. His Madra skill needed two hands to make a Madra, and any move required the use of both hands, one Madra as the heaven, while the other one as the earth. The heaven Madra had the palm markings of clouds in the sky, and its fingerprints were the sun and moon, or the five-element star. On the other hand, the earth Madra had the palm markings of rivers and mountains, and its fingerprints were the lakes and the seas. When the heaven Madra vibrated, the clouds transformed. The five-element star, sun, and moon operated, and the five fingers burst forth with the power of the five elements or the sun and moon. As for the earth Madra, the rivers surged forth while the mountains rose. Every fingerprint was like an ocean that had boundless power. Finally, when the heaven fell and the earth rend, the power was even more terrifying. Earthquake, flood, hurricane, and volcano eruption were hidden in the earth Madra, while stars were moving to strike the ground in the heaven Madra. As a result, the Madra skills transformed into Madras of destruction, and their power was raised several times. However, that was the divine arts of three forms of overturning heaven. Couldn't be used easily. After some time, Qin Mu withdrew his power, and the apparitions of the heaven falling and earth rending around him vanished. You have learned it, and you have already used it well. First ancestor human emperor revealed a gratified smile and said, "Use what you have learned. I anticipate my Madra to be brought to greater heights by you." Qin Mu even had a temperament that was depressed, yet pushing forward to improve. He was affected by heaven and earth Madra and couldn't instantly break out of that temperament. He needed some time to get rid of the effect of heaven and earth Madra. This Madra skill is a bit weird. Qin Mu looked around and saw that the imperial garden was still complete. Not a single petal or leaf was missing. The power of the heaven and earth Madra that he had just executed earlier was clearly massive. Even the sky and the ground could have been shattered. He initially thought that Emperor Yanfeng's imperial garden would be torn apart by his heaven and earth Madra. However, he didn't expect the imperial garden to be completely untouched. Could it be that the terrifying power he had felt was only a kind of hallucination? The spirit of heaven and earth Madra is to support heaven and earth so that they wouldn't fall. It is to support the lives of the people, so why would it destroy heaven and earth? First ancestor human emperor said, "The power of this Madra will only land on the enemy's body. It will not destroy the surroundings." Qin Mu felt slight pity towards him, and he said, "First ancestor, your Madra skills aren't fierce enough. I can feel immense power when practicing, but it can't even damage the emperor's vegetable garden." First ancestor human emperor was speechless from anger and pointed at him, at a loss for words. After a long time, he finally said, "I fought up 800 floors in crimson light heaven-suppressing floor in one go. Haven't you seen the power of my Madra?" Qin Mu shook his head honestly, and he said with a guilty conscience, "I was focused on studying the runes on the divine ring of creation and never watched your fight." On the other hand, Pan Gongzhou kept staring at the battle, and he said, "It was nothing for you to defeat Qixi. Your realm is much higher than him, and it was only natural for you to defeat him." First ancestor human emperor was dispirited as he hung his head down. "What I fought wasn't him, it was crimson light heaven-suppressing floor. If I wanted to fight him, he would have died in the first move. Why do I feel like I have fought 800 floors for nothing?" Qin Mu hurriedly said, "First ancestor, there's no need to be disappointed. Even though this Madra skill of yours is inferior to my sword skill, it can still be very powerful if I change it up. I guarantee that I will be able to destroy the emperor's vegetable garden. After I make some improvements to it later, it will definitely be awe-inspiring and overbearing." First ancestor walked out feebly, waving his hands at him. "Do whatever you want to it, What he was about to say was overcome with a huge sigh. He felt truly helpless. After walking far away, he still wasn't at ease thinking that Qin Mu would change his Madra skill messily. When he saw Qin Mu still continuing to study the runes of creation, he let out a sigh of relief. However, he was still slightly disappointed. He didn't continue to cultivate my Madra skill. Is my Madra skill that insignificant? After a few days, the imperial court negotiated with Qixi, and they signed an oath of alliance. Qixi had turned down some of the items Qin Mu had listed, but he had agreed on most of them. However, he requested Emperor Yanfeng to establish academies and schools in the territory for the remaining survivors of Crimson Light. These academies and schools would be teaching Eternal Peace's paths, skills, and divine arts to the remaining survivors of Crimson Light. Emperor Yanfeng agreed. He drew out a huge piece of territory in the southern border that was near to great ruins, allowing the remaining survivors of Crimson Light to settle down there. Qixi had also agreed to give the divine ring that Qin Mu had instructed to take at all cost. Qin Mu was overjoyed. He immediately headed to South Sea with Qixi to take the divine ring of creation back to the capital city, afraid that he might go back on his word. Pan Gongzhou felt pain in his heart when he saw Qixi agreeing to more than half of Qin Mu's terms and giving so many treasures of the underwater god city to Eternal Peace Empire. "Teacher, this is an alliance, not a submission. Teacher has given Emperor Yanfeng too much. There are tens of thousands of divine weapons. Not to mention that divine ring of creation, it's even a treasure among treasures. How could you just give it away to Eternal Peace?" Qixi sneered and said, "This cult master Qin is just a country bumpkin that has never seen the world before. The emperor has also never seen the world before. The same goes for you." Pan Gongzhou was puzzled. "May teacher enlighten me. These divine weapons are all forged by Crimson Light era. How rich was our celestial heavens back then? Merely several 100,000 divine weapons are nothing to us. They are just reserve weapons in one of the treasuries in the celestial palaces." Qixi continued indifferently. "As for the divine ring of creation, this divine ring had indeed taken quite a lot of effort by my Crimson Light God dynasty to forge. It's probably impossible to forge another one without the blueprints, and skilled craftsmen are rare here. This divine ring is merely a key to unseal my people. Now that my people have already been unsealed, there's no use leaving this divine ring behind. On the other hand, we got a huge territory. It's important that Crimson Light God Dynasty have a place to stand in our ancestral land. We can then slowly absorb and expand our territory. After learning their paths, skills, and divine arts, how can eternal peace defend against the gods of my Crimson Light God Dynasty? Pangong Tso's eyes lighted up, and he rubbed his palms while praising him. Chi, she said with a smile, when standing at a different height, what you see will be different. Disciple, the previous height you were standing on is merely equivalent to the top of a chicken coop. You might think that the earthworms in the ground are good, but to the eagles in the sky, the earthworms are just scraps for the chickens. Pangong Tso bowed down and he said sincerely, Teacher's teaching is right. What a joke that Qin Mu thought he has gotten his way. Chi, she smiled. That's because his horizons aren't high so he can't see far. However, Emperor Yanfeng is the great ruler of Eternal Peace era, and never did I expect him to be also short-sighted. I hold him in contempt. This kind of emperor isn't worthy of ruling this land. Follow me to meet Emperor Yanfeng. I need to find him for some matters. The master and disciple went into the palace to seek an audience, and Yan Zhigui came out in a hurry to welcome them. His Majesty is in the Imperial Garden, observing Lord Qin who is testing the treasure. Please follow me. Qi, she followed him to the Imperial Garden. From a distance, he could see the huge divine ring of creation hoisted on a fake mountain. Around them were tall walls that blocked and prevented outsiders from entering. When they arrived, there were 3 to 5 gods who seemed to be civil officials. They were standing around the divine ring of creation with Emperor Yanfeng. First Ancestor was among them as well. On the side, the Empress brought Ling Yuxiu and other princes and princesses. She had over a dozen palace maids serving her. In the center of the divine ring, Qin Mu took out a huge pile of calculation spirit weapons to form a huge calculation tool. He was constantly calculating something, and no one knew what he was tinkering with. Your Majesty. Qi, she went forward and greeted him. Since we have already formed an alliance, I will have to leave eternal peace to meet the Son of God. Even though I have already signed an oath of alliance with your Majesty, I will still need to inform the Son of God. Could your Majesty send envoys to head towards Crimson Light Floating World to meet the Son of God? Yes, sending envoys is necessary, Emperor Yanfeng said with a smile. After Minister Qin finishes testing the divine ring of creation, I will send out a few envoys to follow Dao Friend Qi Shi towards the floating world. Dao Friend Qi Shi, please wait a moment. Qi Shi understood, and he stood at the side with a smile as he looked quietly at Qin Mu calculating in the ring. Pangong Tso smiled as well. He was very pleased as he thought to himself, I've heard Emperor Yanfeng is a muddle-headed and tyrannical fellow, wanting to chop off people's heads at the drop of a hat. If Emperor Yanfeng discovered that the divine ring that he had spent a huge price on is useless, he would definitely chop off the head of this guy. In the divine ring of creation, Qin Mu calculated for some time, and he finally kept his spirit weapons of calculation with a smile. I'm 100% confident now. Qi Shi said with a smile, Little friend Qin, if you want to execute the divine ring of our Crimson Light era, you can ask me, and I'll teach you. Qin Mu shook his head as he tried to light up the activation rune on the divine ring. You don't know. There's no use asking you. Qi Shi wasn't angry at all. He remained smiling as he said, The activation rune isn't that, little friend Qin. You have miscalculated. It's right. Qin Mu floated in the ring, and the runes on the divine ring of creation lighted up one after another. The runes transformed continuously like flowing water while the huge rings overlapped the small rings. The divine rings spun, and they seemed different from what Qi Shi had executed before. These divine rings were actually rotating in the reverse direction. WRRNG, WRNNG, WRNNG. The speed of the divine ring of creation spun faster and faster. Runes shone out in all directions and quickly landed on every single person in this vast courtyard. Suddenly, snapping sounds rang out, and Qi Shi hurriedly looked over. He saw the bodies of Emperor Yanfeng and the rest changing rapidly. Emperor Yanfeng, who was formidable and extraordinary, had now grown a fish head. As for the gods beside Emperor Yanfeng, some had their heads turned into a treetop, while some had their heads turned into a jellyfish. Even the Empress was turned into a huge sea beast. She was startled, and he quickly looked at Pangongtso. Pangongtso was already sprawled on the ground, and he had already turned into a huge sea snake that was currently squirming. She hurriedly touched his head, and he cried out in surprise. His heads had also become 3 fish heads. Not only that, his primordial spirit was changing as well. All the magic powers that he had cultivated diligently for the past hundreds of thousands of years were completely unable to be used. She was flustered as he looked at his legs that had turned into a fishtail. Among the people present, only First Ancestor wasn't assimilated aside from Qin Mu. However, his corporeal body was also transforming. Fish scales and gills were growing out of his body from time to time. It was evident that First Ancestor Human Emperor couldn't completely defend against the power of this divine ring of creation too. This wasn't a divine art that could cause significant damage to others, but instead, it was a strange power of creation. Because First Ancestor Human Emperor had learned the art of creation before, he was able to defend against it. This is bad. She suddenly came to a realization. No wonder Qin Mu, this rascal, had to get this divine ring of creation no matter what. When this rascal took a liking to my god execution mysterious knife, I should have known that this rascal is as experienced as an old expert thief. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 642 Vicious Style. Xi's cultivation was profound after all, so he immediately tried to resist being assimilated by the divine ring of creation. However, his consciousness gradually turned blurry, and his vital qi was unable to be used as well. A body with 3 heads and 6 arms was a symbol of having a strong corporeal body for battle during Crimson Light era, but against the power of creation, he was completely helpless. Soon, he transformed into a huge fish with 3 heads and 6 fins, flopping on the ground. At this moment, other than Qin Mu, who was in the center of the divine rings, only First Ancestor Human Emperor was unaffected by the power of creation. He still retained his consciousness. Everywhere in the garden, various kinds of sea creatures and sea plants had turned the whole garden upside down. Luckily, before Qin Mu had tested the divine ring of creation, he had already ordered people to construct high walls around them to block the rays of these divine rings. Therefore, the power of creation didn't affect anyone outside. Human Emperor Qin, enough! First Ancestor Human Emperor hurriedly shouted. The power of this treasure is extraordinary. There's no need to test anymore. Be careful of causing irreparable damage to their primordial spirits. In the circular ring, Qin Mu stopped executing the divine ring of creation, and the rings stopped rotating. The scales and gills on First Ancestor gradually disappeared while the others in the garden were still flopping on the ground. They didn't recover their true form. Qin Mu waited for a moment, but these people still haven't returned to their original form. He pondered and said, "This is a kind of seal. It will seal their corporeal bodies and primordial spirits when it landed on their bodies, and they are unable to undo it by themselves." He took out a brush and paper to write down his ideas. First Ancestor Human Emperor kept hurrying him. Undo the seal for them quickly. The longer things drag out, both the soul and the primordial spirit will be assimilated. Qin Mu kept his brush and paper, and let the divine ring of creation rotate in the right direction. Runes for unsealing shone in all directions, and they removed all the seals of creations on everyone's bodies. Bang, bang, bang. Sounds of explosion rang out as everyone's corporeal bodies transformed back to normal. Even Emperor Yanfeng was looking at this treasure in fear. God Qi, she was full of regret as he felt his heart bleeding. He looked at the divine ring of creation and wanted to take it back very much. He also realized that this was probably Qin Mu's goal at the start. It wasn't the hundreds of thousands of divine weapons on the list. Qin Mu would definitely not return this divine ring to him, even if he handed over Crimson Light Heaven-suppressing floor. The value of this divine ring had already far surpassed Crimson Light Heaven-suppressing floor. Old expert thief. Truly an old expert thief. An old and experienced thief possessed an incomparably ruthless set of eyes that were able to differentiate what was a treasure and what was not. Even treasures that one didn't know were in their house could be dug out by him, and be bought away at an extremely cheap price or just stolen straight away. This kind of old thief usually possessed a different type of thought process that ordinary people don't have. With their keen senses, they could detect places that others couldn't see, and an old thief could make a dull treasure shine bright once more. In Qixi's eyes, Qin Mu was obviously an old and experienced thief. He himself didn't even see the greatest use of the divine ring of creation. He had only treated it as a key to awaken his people. However, Qin Mu have thought the other way and treated the divine ring as a seal. In reality, Qin Mu was no different from an ordinary youth. He was playful and mischievous, but the great difference was he grew up with an old thief that would never fail to steal. Cripple was used to seeing all kinds of treasures, and his thought process was different from ordinary people. He could usually think of what others couldn't, and since Qin Mu was taught by him ever since he was young, he naturally looked like an old and experienced thief. After testing the treasure, everyone was covered in dirt, so they left at once to change their clothing. Not long after, Emperor Yanfeng returned and asked with a smile, "Is Mr. Qixi planning to return to the floating world? It's only proper that I send some envoys to accompany you on the trip." "Sir, please wait a moment." Qixi nodded his head, and his gaze flickered. "Your Majesty, I would like to use Crimson Light Heaven-Suppressing Floor to exchange for the Divine Ring of Creation. May I know if that's possible?" Emperor Yanfeng laughed. "The weather today is perfect. Minister Qin, you have made a mess of my imperial garden. Off with your head." Pangong Tso revealed a look of anticipation, but Emperor Yanfeng still wore a smile. It was apparent that he had just said that casually and he was actually feeling great. Pangong Tso was disappointed. She took a glance at Qin Mu and said, "I felt little friend Qin is intelligent, so I would like him to follow me to the floating world." Emperor Yanfeng's heart stirred slightly as he looked at Qin Mu. Qin Mu immediately shook his head. "I won't go even if you beat me to death. I will be beaten to death if I go with you." Emperor Yanfeng said with a smile, "I indeed need an envoy that could control the situation after heading to the floating world. If Imperial Preceptor is here, I would ask him to make a trip, but he still has to take charge of the battle in Supreme Emperor Heaven. He can't just leave the battlefield. Other than Imperial Preceptor, the only one who wouldn't lack the character of my eternal peace will be Minister Qin. Even I am inferior to Minister Qin." Qin Mu felt refreshed and said with a smile, "Won't go." Beside him, a little eunuch carried a brush and offered up a small booklet. Emperor Yanfeng raised the brush and dipped it into the ink, adding one more stroke on the little booklet. "You won't go even after I have flattered you? What's your Majesty writing?" Qin Mu walked forward and saw numerous names on the small booklet. They were mostly names of officials, and his name was also among them. His name had 6 to 7 sets of tally marks, and there was one set with 4 strokes. Among the names on this page, he had the most set of tally marks. Emperor Yanfeng hurriedly closed the small booklet. However, Qin Mu's hands were quicker. He stole the small booklet and flipped through it. There were over a dozen pages in the small booklet, and the name with the most set of tally marks wasn't his. It belonged to the Empress. She had dozens of sets of tally marks. Emperor Yanfeng quickly snatched the booklet back, and he snarled, "How dare you steal my stuff? Off with your head." After saying that, he added another stroke on Qin Mu's name. Qin Mu came to a realization. He took a glance at the Empress who was on the side and thought to himself, they must have quarreled frequently, so the Emperor had already chopped off the Empress' head over hundreds of times. I have a hunch that the Empress doesn't know about this. If she does, the chambers of imperial concubines will be in havoc. Emperor Yanfeng carefully kept the small booklet, and he said to Qixi, "Minister Qin is my right-hand man. He can't leave the imperial court easily. So may I ask Mr. Qixi, how long will you take? If the time you take is too long, I won't bear to let Minister Qin go." Qixi said with a smile, "Don't worry, Your Majesty. When I had originally brought my clansmen and controlled the planet, we floated in space and didn't know where the ancestral land was. That's why we spent thousands of years to find the ancestral land. If I bring only little friend Qin this time, we can go and return in just a year." Emperor Yanfeng asked curiously, Why did you have to spend so much time in the past and it's so fast this time? Xianxia replied, in the past, there was only a star atlas that marked the ancestral land, so we still needed to calculate the course of the stars. We also needed to avoid the pursuit of our enemies. Because of this, we were delayed for a very long time. Now that I know the way, there's a fast ship in the underwater celestial palaces from my Crimson Light era. Its speed is even faster than a planet. Therefore, the speed is thousands of times faster than before. Emperor Yanfeng put his heart at ease, and he said with a smile, Mr. Qishi, please wait for a few days. Minister Qin will be leaving with you. Qin Mu immediately shook his head. Your Majesty, Emperor Yanfeng said sincerely, a man should read 1,000,000 books and travel 1,000,000,000 miles. The only one that won't bring disgrace to our empire is Minister Qin. Your mission in Crimson Light Floating World is critical. Whether or not we will be able to ally with the remaining survivors of Crimson Light will be up to your abilities. There's no one more suitable than you. I also know that there will be many dangers and it will be difficult, but only you are capable enough. Qin Mu's face revealed a huge frown as he looked at Qishi. Qishi smiled and didn't say a word. Behind Qishi, Pan Gongzhou did a slitting action across his neck. After a moment, the two of them took their leave. Qin Mu's face revealed a huge frown as he looked at Qishi. Qishi smiled and didn't say a word. Behind Qishi, Pan Gongzhou did a slitting action across his neck. After a moment, the two of them took their leave. Emperor Yanfeng saw them walking away and said, Minister Qin, Qishi isn't the master of the house. Crimson Light Son of God is the one who can make decisions, and the oath that Qishi had signed with my eternal peace is not even bullshit. The Son of God needs to nod his head before the oath of alliance is in effect. Eternal peace may look stable now, but it's actually riddled with dangers. That's why we need to confirm this oath of alliance with the floating world no matter what. When you reach the floating world, that Crimson Light Son of God will probably create trouble for the envoys of eternal peace. And I can't find anyone else better than you to handle this kind of situation. These are my sincere words. I can't personally go there, but I will let Princess Xiao go with you. If anything happens, my princess will die together with you. Qin Mu blinked his eyes. I'll go, all right? He looked at First Ancestor Human Emperor. First Ancestor hesitated for a moment before saying, I can go with you. Qin Mu settled his heart down and he said with a smile, There's nothing to worry about, Your Majesty. You can be at ease. Emperor Yanfeng let out a shaky breath and sighed. I'm still not very reassured even if you guys are going. When you pass by Supreme Emperor Heaven, visit Imperial Preceptor and ask his opinion. I shall prepare several gifts for you guys to offer to Crimson Light Son of God when you visit him. Qin Mu nodded. 2 days later, Emperor Yanfeng prepared the gifts. They were the 3 basic sword forms that had been compiled into books. Qin Mu was the one who will carry them, while Ling Yuxiu was in charge of the exotic treasures. Qin Mu, First Ancestor Human Emperor, and Ling Yuxiu prepared to leave for their journey. Qishi and Pan Gongzhou had already prepared the ship. It was a huge ship that was in the underwater city in South Sea. Qishi took it out from the seal, and it was an ancient flying ship that had 6 wings. The ship was covered in all kinds of gorgeous runes. The bow of the ship was the head of a phoenix, while the body of the ship was imprinted with all kinds of bird runes. Qin Mu examined the ship in detail and he was shocked. The head of the ship was a real phoenix head, and it has blood and flesh. The wings and feathers were also real phoenix feathers. Moreover, the ship's body was imprinted with all kinds of bird runes that were actually skins of divine beasts and divine birds. On the skins were natural runes of the divine beasts and divine birds. In that case, these 6 wings. His heart was filled with wonder and shock when he realized that the 6 wings on this ship were wings of gods, and they were definitely not from ordinary gods. Crimson Light Era had used the bodies of gods to forge divine weapons. From this point, one could see the style of this era from its history. Barbaric, wild, and violent. Not only this ship, but even God Execution Mysterious Knife could also show the vicious style of this era. God Execution Mysterious Knife was made from the head of an overlord on Emperor's throne. This trip to Crimson Light Floating World would definitely not be an easy journey. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 643, Heaven Duke's Xuandu. Ling Yuxiu ran out from the ship's hold. She had found something strange with the ship. She said with a soft voice, "The one that herds cows. The dragon bones of this ship are truly the bones of a dragon." Qin Mu was stunned. He followed her into the ship's hold and saw that the dragon bones of the ship were the huge skeletal frame of a dragon. That means when the ship flew, the dragon bones would move left and right like a snake. Not only that, he even saw the enormous ribs of the dragon forming the main body of this ship. When he touched the body of the ship, he found that it was moist and the skin wrapped around it was from the skins of gods and devils. They used the flesh and blood of gods to make this ship, and the heads of gods to make treasures. Crimson Light Era is indeed a bit too barbaric. Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu shuddered. At that moment, the flying ship had already set sail towards Spirit Energy Mutual Shift Bridge. When Qin Mu came to the deck, he saw Pan Gongzhou studying the deck. Qin Mu also examined the deck in detail. He raised his head to look at Pan Gongzhou, and Pan Gongzhou did the same thing. They both knew what each other was thinking as they cried out in unison. Skin-wrapped bone plates. The entire deck on the ship was made with skin-wrapped bone plates. Countless gods had been killed just to make this ship. Mr. Qi Shi, isn't the way your Crimson Light Era handled things a little too overbearing and terrifying? First Ancestor Human Emperor had examined the ship as well, and he shook his head. To make such a ship, several thousand gods must have died. Qi Shi smiled. Your founding Emperor era only lasted 20,000 years, right? First Ancestor Human Emperor was slightly stunned. He nodded his head. Not even 20,000 years. Qi Shi said, "You won't know what Crimson Light Era has experienced when you guys haven't even gone through 20,000 years. There is no limit to the lifespan of a god, and 20,000 years is enough to give birth to millions of gods. These gods are immortal, and therefore, as the dynasty thrives, there would be more and more gods. Crimson Light God Dynasty has a history of 100,000 years, so the number of gods had already reached an extent that it was hard for heaven and earth to withstand any longer. The universe and land that your founding Emperor era had ruled over were far inferior to the level that Crimson Light Era has reached. Also, your territory was 2 to 3 times smaller than Crimson Light God Dynasty, and yet, even with such a large territory, it was still unable to provide for so many gods. When the talents of the later generations had no more space to improve, they started rebelling and creating havoc. When they created havoc, his expression was calm, and his voice held boundless murderous intent. We killed them naturally. Killing several thousand gods to create such a valuable treasure was, of course, value for money. First Ancestor Human Emperor frowned. Isn't that against ethics? Against ethics? When your founding Emperor era had been wiped out, how many people died? Isn't that against ethics too? Qi Shi scoffed and said, "For example, those Taotai sacks on your body, aren't they treasures made from killing Taotai beasts?" Qin Mu shook his head. "My 2 Taotai sacks were made by Grandmaster. Grandmaster gave them to me." Pan Gongzhou's face turned black. Qi Shi said, "Killing a god to make a treasure is something that happens in every era. The destruction of my Crimson Light God Dynasty happened 350,000 years ago, and after that, it was the rise of High Emperor Era. High Emperor Era lasted 300,000 years and was the longest-lasting era in history. It was also the most flourishing era. The reason why the remaining survivors of Crimson Light Era hid so long in the floating world and didn't come searching for the ancestral land was mainly because we were afraid of being captured by High Emperor Celestial Heavens and be made into treasures." Qin Mu recalled his previous time travel. Bai Pure and her brother didn't look like anyone who would kill people and turn them into treasures. However, from his encounter in Bent Mountain Shrine, Bent Mountain God must have killed a Taotai divine beast and turned it into treasures and a shrine. His heart stirred slightly. He took out Sun Jade Eye and Moon Jade Eye from his Taotai sack and asked, "Senior Qi Shi, these 2 treasures should also be treasures from High Emperor Era, am I right?" Qi Shi looked at them. "They should be. If they are truly treasures of High Emperor Era, then these 2 eyes aren't made from jade. Instead, they are real eyes of a god, the eyes of a Taotai. Qin Mu jumped in shock. When he touched the jade eyes, he clearly felt the texture of jade. He couldn't see that they were made of blood and flesh at all. Could High Emperor Era be as vicious as Crimson Light Era? But, from how Bai Pure and the rest handled matters, they didn't look vicious at all. In that case, how did High Emperor Era deal with the problem of having too many gods? At that time, the flying ship had passed through Spirit Energy Mutual Shift Bridge, and they came to Supreme Emperor Heaven. When they reached Li City, Qin Mu disembarked the ship to make inquiries. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had not yet returned. Imperial Preceptor must be cultivating alongside Saint Woodcutter in the Devil Race's Luofu Heaven. They then came to Luofu Heaven. There were no people in this world in destruction. On the sacrificial altars, gods were guarding there without resting at all. Qin Mu came to the sacrificial altar where Saint Woodcutter was, and First Ancestor also couldn't help becoming excited. When Saint Woodcutter saw him from afar, he immediately turned around and avoided him. First Ancestor Human Emperor became depressed. She looked at Saint Woodcutter and sneered. Qin Mu walked up to the altar and expressed his reason for coming. Saint Woodcutter said, "Your junior brother is currently cultivating in seclusion, so he won't be coming out for quite some time. You will need to wait 1.5 years for him to come out from seclusion." Qin Mu shook his head. "We couldn't wait that long. Since junior brother is in seclusion, can teacher tell us what we need to take note for our trip?" Saint Woodcutter took a deep look into his eyes, and he revealed a smile. "Follow the local customs and conditions, observe what others do and follow what they do. If you can't beat them, take down that willow leaf on your forehead." Qin Mu said with a smile, "The people of Crimson Light Era are all fierce and overbearing. I'm afraid I would need to kill if I follow their customs. That's why I told you to take down your willow leaf if you can't beat them. Besides, even if you create a huge trouble, isn't there still Earth Count?" Qin Mu's face became as black as charcoal. Saint Woodcutter had his back facing First Ancestor Human Emperor. He said leisurely, "Also, you can't trust an army deserter. An army deserter that has escaped once will escape again." Qin Mu turned his head and saw First Ancestor standing at the bow of the ship without saying anything. Saint Woodcutter summoned Ling Yuxiu over and said with a smile, "Lass, you are much better than your father. When you become the Empress in the future, treat your people well and treat my disciple well. Take his advice seriously." Ling Yuxiu took a glance at Qin Mu and said delightedly, "I will. Good child. Your cultivation is the weakest, so let me gift a little something to you." Saint Woodcutter remained smiling as he suddenly swung his axe up to hack at the forehead of Ling Yuxiu. Ling Yuxiu jumped in surprise, but she couldn't feel any pain. Saint Woodcutter hacked several times, hitting Ling Yuxiu's head over and over again. When he was finished, he stowed his huge axe and said, "Child of Ling family, remember today's words. You may all go." Ling Yuxiu was rather puzzled. She turned around and returned to the flying ship with Qin Mu. She looked at Saint Woodcutter's back and sneered, "Dao friend, let us challenge each other if we have the chance in the future." Saint Woodcutter didn't turn around, but he waved his hand in response. The flying ship rushed into outer space and quickly vanished. In the starry sky, a flying ship flapped its 3 pairs of wings and streaked across the dark sky. Without any resistance in this vast sky, the flying ship flew faster and faster. The speed of the ship was actually raised to an unimaginable extent, moving as fast as a lightning bolt. They quickly passed through an asteroid belt, and huge chunks of asteroid crashed on the ship. However, the runes on the ship flowed, and those mountain-sized stars were instantly reduced to powder. She took out a star compass to determine their bearing. The star compass shone brightly as it showed a gorgeous star atlas. He said, "Half a year later, we will reach Crimson Light Floating World. For the next half a year, you can move anywhere, but you cannot leave this ship." Qin Mu examined the projection of the star atlas and saw that the path of the stars was extremely strange. Star clusters were actually swirling around a certain place, but that place was completely empty. There was only dazzling light there. "Senior Qi, what is this place?" He pointed at a black hole-like place. Xianxia looked at it, and he raised his eyebrows. Youth from the countryside, you have never even walked out of the ancestral land, so you naturally don't know the marvel of the universe. First ancestor took a look and said, "That's the place that is the relative opposite of Yudu. It's where Heaven Duke resides. It's extremely mysterious." Ling Yuxiu also hadn't heard of Heaven Duke before, and she listened together with Qin Mu. She asked, "Heaven Duke is the relative opposite of Yudu? Since Earth Count is in charge of reaping the souls, what does Heaven Duke do?" Before first ancestor human emperor could reply, Xianxia explained, "Heaven Duke is the ancestor of gods, and he controls the operations of the astronomical phenomenons. He is fair and selfless. The stars you're seeing in the sky all have Heaven Duke behind them. All the stars in every world are controlled by Heaven Duke. This god is no inferior to Earth Count, and with the aspect of the celestial bodies projecting millions and millions of bodies, he is truly powerful." First ancestor human emperor said, "Heaven Duke can enter any world at will, but the sky of eternal peace is fake. Eternal peace doesn't have real astronomical phenomenons, so Heaven Duke can't go there." Pan Gongzhou had never heard of this before, and he unknowingly became entranced. He suddenly said, "Does this mean that all the sun, moon, and stars we are seeing are all fake?" "Not entirely." First ancestor human emperor said, "When it's morning in great ruins, the sun you see is real. Sometimes you can also see the moon and a few scattered stars in the morning, and those are real too." Pan Gongzhou was stunned. He muttered, "If the sun, moon, and stars seen from great ruins are real, and the ones outside are fake, what's the seal in great ruins for?" Qin Mu threw him a glance. "It's sealing the people outside great ruins, of course. Hasn't Grandmaster ever been curious why there are only 4 great spirit bodies among the people outside great ruins, while the spirit bodies in great ruins are strange and varied?" Pan Gongzhou was dejected. "Sealing us, it's to seal us. What have we done wrong to be sealed? The people outside great ruins always looked down on the people of great ruins and called them abandoned people." Pan Gongzhou was originally the Grandmaster of the Prairie and the founder of Roland's Golden Palace, so he held even more disdain for the people of great ruins. He frequently seized the strange beasts and the people of great ruins to cultivate his shaman spells. Listening to first ancestors' words now, they had completely shattered his belief and pride. After living 10,000 years, it was only now that he realized he was one of the abandoned people, the people abandoned by gods. Why do they still have to seal us after breaking our divine bridge? Why didn't they allow us to become gods? He couldn't believe Qin Mu, but he had no doubts for first ancestor human emperor's words. That was because this existence was the first generation human emperor, the man who had led the ancestors of all races out from that calamity. Pan Gongzhou's ancestor was also one of them. Anyone could lie to him, only first ancestor human emperor wouldn't. The flying ship was leaving a trail of light as it flew, and it remained in the starry sky for a long while. God she turned back to look and frowned. Even though this ship is fast, it isn't unmatched in the world. Enemies would probably discover the traces left behind by the treasure ship. We need to borrow a path from Heaven Duke and head to the floating world as soon as possible. We can't let the enemies discover the location of the floating world. Qin Mu's spirit was roused. Borrowing a path from Heaven Duke? Does this mean that we can see this majestic existence now? It's still early. The journey from here to where Heaven Duke is located will take more than a month. The flying ship moved like flickering light and passing shadows. Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu were currently dual cultivating their primordial spirits when, all of a sudden, the flying ship jolted and slowed down. The two of them pulled their primordial spirits back and walked up on the deck. They saw a large-scale god city floating alone in the starry sky, and there was still a sun orbiting around it. This god city was dilapidated. It had gone through a terrifying battle, getting destroyed in the process. The flying ship flew over this god city, and Qin Mu looked down. He saw numerous tall statues of gods that had fallen over in the city, and these god statues had 3 heads and 6 arms. They must have been sculptures of Crimson Light era. Not long after, they came to a shattered star, and there were also numerous structures on it. The structures had the style of Crimson Light era. As they walked, the dilapidated god city floated quietly in the starry star. They could still see countless corpses floating limply on this path they were taking. To find a place for them to settle down, the strong practitioners of Crimson Light era had left behind countless gods to protect their clansmen. Most of them had died in battle here. No matter how barbaric Crimson Light era's customs were, they had still fought to death for the survival. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 644, Heaven Duke who had fallen into the seal. The few youths on the flying ship couldn't help becoming astonished, and they tried to look into the depths of the light. They tried to have a clear view of Heaven Duke's eyes, and yet they could only see light and nothing else. Ling Yuxiu muttered, "If this ship has to sail 2 days to be able to see the entire eye of Heaven Duke, how big is Heaven Duke's true body exactly? Should be on par with Earth Count." Qin Mu said, "I had seen Earth Count's true body before, and his horns were formed by worlds that in destruction. Just his horns alone were vast and boundless beyond imagination. Natural-born gods like this have remarkable abilities that ordinary humans can never imagine." Qi said, "If you can see the full appearance of Heaven Duke, you will be able to see how many suns are hidden in his body." The flying ship sailed in Heaven Duke's gaze, which was shining intensely. Even though the speed of the ship was fast, Heaven Duke's eye was simply too huge. After sailing for 2 days and 2 nights, Qin Mu and the rest turned their heads back, and they finally saw the outline of this eye. This eye that gave off boundless light and completely blocked their vision made their flying ship look insignificant when compared to it. Yet they were still unable to see the full appearance of Heaven Duke. Qin Mu looked at this eye and he was in astonishment. Suddenly, that golden willow leaf on his eye seemed to be blown off by a gust of wind and actually fell off the heart of his brows. He was alarmed and hurriedly grabbed hold of the golden willow leaf. At this moment, he suddenly felt something tunneling into his vertical eye in the heart of his brows. What had tunneled in was a trail of light which vanished after entering his eye. Qin Mu was bewildered, and he moved his primordial spirit around to search, but he couldn't find any abnormality in his third eye. "Could I have seen wrongly?" he exclaimed in his heart as he picked up the golden willow leaf to stick back on the heart of his brows. Meanwhile, in the depths of his third eye, among the layers of seals, a vast and boundless land floated in the darkness, and this piece of land was his jade pendant. The path of the unbroken chains of peaks formed a Qin word. In the sky above the huge land, the voice of a great Buddha was resounding, and the lingering Buddha voice was trying to suppress that fierce existence that was being suppressed in the land. Right at this moment, a ray of light shone in and lighted up the land in the darkness. The light then moved around the sky without stopping and circled round and round the Qin word seal. In the center of the Qin word seal, an incomparably huge baby was lying there in utter boredom. He grabbed onto his toe and sent them into his mouth, giving off cries of a baby while playing around. This baby was Qin Fengqing, and he pulled out his toe from his mouth. He took a glance at the light that was surrounding him, and he suddenly showed a fierce look, revealing his mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. "Big fella, what are you looking at? I'll eat you if you continue looking." "I'm naturally looking at you." That light shrunk into a ball of light, and an ancient voice came from the light. "Interesting life form. Yudu could actually give birth to a fierce spirit like you. It shows that Earth Count's control on Yudu has become weaker." Qin Fengqing stood up. He jumped and clapped his hands as he tried to grab this ball of light. That ball of light avoided him and said, "I'm Heaven Duke of Xuandu, a god that's like Earth Count. You can't do anything to me. I'm just here to take a look at you, this interesting little fellow." Qin Mu licked his lips in excitement. "As big as old man Earth Count? How long will I have to eat to finish eating you?" As he said that, he continued to hop around and catch that ball of light. He jumped higher and higher until he got smacked back down by the seal. Heaven Duke's voice came from that ball of light. "So you are a stubborn little brat. No wonder you would get sealed. I'm only here to see you. I'm taking my leave now." Qin Fengqing was still jumping around and chased him relentlessly as he wanted to eat him. That ball of light flew out, and at this moment, The vein lines of a willow leaf appeared outside the heaven and blocked his way of retreat. At the same time, trails of devil light and devil chi came out from this land and sealed the sky. Crap! I've fallen into the seal. The ancient voice came from that ball of light. To seal him, Earth can't really splurge his fortune. To actually use his horn to seal him. When that willow leaf is covered on that eye, it will activate the power of Earth Count's horn. I'm merely a clone. I don't have the magic power to break out. As he said until here, Buddha rays shone brightly in midair and linked together with the golden willow leaf and the horn of Earth Count. This clone of Heaven Duke was instantly suppressed and he fell onto the Qin word seal, transforming into Elder wearing a white robe. He had white eyebrows, white beard and white hair that was fluttering in the wind. He raised his head to look at Qin Fengqing and muttered, "There's also the seal of Brahma?" That's right. It's Brahma who had connected the golden willow leaf and the horn of Earth Count together, allowing the golden willow leaf to have the effect of activating Earth Count's seal, making me trapped here. Qin Fengqing was ineffably excited as he pounced at the elder in white. On the flying ship, Qin Mu suddenly felt the heart of his brows swelling up. It was slightly painful, so he hurriedly covered the heart of his brows. "What happened to you?" First Ancestor asked in concern. "The heart of my brows suddenly hurts." Qin Mu felt the pain becoming more and more intense. His palm also trembled from the vibrations, and First Ancestor Human Emperor said in a hurry, "Place your hand down and let me take a look." Qin Mu placed his hand down and First Ancestor Human Emperor immediately saw something that seemed to be rolling around under the golden willow leaf on the heart of his brows. It would make the willow leaf bulge up from time to time, and it even seemed to be moving continuously. Heaven and Earth Madra. Flipping heaven and earth. First Ancestor Human Emperor gave a shout and his Madra gently pressed on the heart of Qin Mu's brows. His Madra passed through the leaf and struck straight into Qin Mu's third eye, transforming into a huge palm print that flipped the heaven and earth. This Madra smacked down the clone of Heaven Duke that was trying to break out of the seal. When this Madra landed, heaven wasn't heaven and earth wasn't earth. The Qin word land was flipped and the clone of Heaven Duke gave a grunt as he got squashed. First Ancestor Human Emperor pulled his palm back and he asked in concern, "How do you feel now?" Qin Mu said in astonishment, "It's no longer painful. It's really not painful anymore." First Ancestor Human Emperor said with a smile, "This is the marvel of heaven and earth Madra. Cultivate more and don't let down my teachings." Qin Mu gave a sound of acknowledgement before running to cultivate his primordial spirit with Ling Yuxiu. First Ancestor Human Emperor gave a sigh of relief and he had a solemn expression. Inside his third eye, Qin Fengqing ran over excitedly to grab the legs to Heaven Duke's clone to smash around randomly. He smashed this elder in white until he was muddle-headed before he straightened him to take a bite. No flavor? Qin Fengqing was skeptical and he saw that portion he had chewed off was a ball of light. He couldn't taste any flavor and thus he threw the elder in white to one side. He had lost interest in him. The elder in white got up and rubbed his waist. He felt pain and soreness in his limb, but as he was a ball of light, he could recover very fast after being bitten. "Why don't we play catching?" Qin Fengqing was suddenly interested again. He clapped his hands and ran over with his short, stumpy legs as he said with a baby voice, "You shall hide and I shall catch. If I catch you, I shall pull apart your arms and legs. Since you can grow them back, we can play this for a very long time. Heaven Duke's light will cover up the light trail that our flying ship leaves behind. In this case, we won't have to worry about being detected by the celestial heavens." She looked behind him and he let out a sigh of relief. Now the pursuers won't be able to track us down. Pan Gongzhou couldn't help being skeptical. Are there really pursuers? First Ancestor nodded his head. This is a great chance to find the remaining survivors of Crimson Light God Dynasty. The celestial heavens won't let this chance go. When we left Luofu Heaven, we were already being watched. Your cultivations are a little weak, so you guys didn't sense anything, but I can also feel a pair of gaze currently staring at us. Until we entered Heaven Duke's Xuandu did we finally shake off that pair of gaze. She said, "That person that was chasing us should be Great Sun Sovereign." First Ancestor was astonished. "It's actually him?" Even though I don't know much about this great sun sovereign, I have also heard before of the speed of the great sun sovereign from that extraterritorial celestial heavens is extremely fast. Furthermore, he also have many gods under him. If he chases us, we will probably find it hard to shake him off. She executed the star atlas again, and he said, if we avoid the suns on the way, we should be able to shake off this star sovereign. Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu's primordial spirits danced together in the air, and Qin Mu's primordial spirit asked curiously, I've seen Sun Sovereign before. His abilities aren't very high. He got slashed to death by my grandpa Butcher in one knife. Where is this great Sun Sovereign from? First Ancestor Human Emperor explained patiently. Great Sun Sovereign is different from Sun Sovereign. Sun Sovereign is merely a little pawn, and he's an ordinary god from founding Emperor Celestial Heavens. He was a god of Sun Herd tribe. He later betrayed and became the dog of the extraterritorial Celestial Heavens. On the other hand, Great Sun Sovereign is rumored to be a god born from the sun who is incomparably powerful. There are Golden Crow Spirit Body, Fire Dragon Spirit Body, Fire Crow Spirit Body. They are all cultivating according to the form of Great Sun Sovereign. After cultivating to a god, the stance of a battle that was shown as their primordial spirit and corporeal body fuse would be the form of Great Sun Sovereign. The form of Sun Sovereign should also be the form of Great Sun Sovereign. The two of them kept their primordial spirits back into their bodies, and Qin Mu's heart was slightly shaken. He cried out, an ancestral god like Saturn Sovereign? First Ancestor Human Emperor said, you know Saturn Sovereign? Saturn Sovereign is 1 to 2 ranks lower than Great Sun Sovereign. However, she isn't on the level of an ancestral god. She's not as strong as and as ancient as Great Sun Sovereign. Great Sun Sovereign is one of the big shots in the extraterritorial celestial heavens, and Saturn Sovereign can only be considered a big shot of a place. Qin Mu and the rest seemed to understand and yet not understand. After the flying ship left the eyes of Heaven Duke, trails of light followed the traces of light left behind by the ship to rush into Xuandu. Yet over here, the traces of the flying ship had disappeared. These fishes that had slipped the net are truly crafty. The light paused and transformed into a god with bird wings, human body, and 3 legs. The bird head had 3 eyes, and on the forehead was a vertical eye that contained boundless flames. It was like a sun hidden in the eyes. On his legs were the scales of a dragon, and while his wings had black phoenix feathers. When covering his body, it was like a long black robe that hung to his feet. This god was extremely huge, but in comparison to Heaven Duke, he was insignificant. He raised his head to look into Heaven Duke's eye and asked loudly, Heaven Duke above, may I ask if you have seen a ship passing by this place? Heaven Duke, who was in Xuandu, was very busy, and he was supervising the operations of all the stars in the various worlds. After a moment, a ball of starlight appeared and transformed into a person of light whose face couldn't be seen clearly. His voice rumbled like thunder. I'm supervising the stars of the heavens, and I had not seen it. There are numerous celestial soldiers and generals on the numerous stars in my Xuandu. You can ask them. Great Sun Sovereign apologized and said, Sorry for disturbing Heaven Duke. I seek your forgiveness. After saying so, he flapped his wings to leave. That person of light also dispersed. Not long later, light shone brightly from the stars on Heaven Duke's body as tens of thousands of gods flew out from these suns. Numerous suns seemed to link up into lines from the divine rays given off from the gods flying as they searched for the ship in all directions. Caw, caw, caw. Those were fire crow gods that had filled the entire sky. They had a crow's head and a human's body. On their back grew fire-red wings, and they carried a quiver on their backs. They grabbed onto vermilion red bottle gourds in their hands, while their 3 bird claws grabbed onto huge bows. Their speed was extremely fast. Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 645, Breaking the Fire Crow Formation. The voyage of the flying ship took over 10 days to finally sail out of Xuandu. Qin Mu turned his head back, and he still couldn't see the complete features of Heaven Duke, and he couldn't help feeling slight pity. Qin Mu looked at the faraway sun, and the flying ship was currently sailing at the edge of the sun. Even though the sun was very far from them and was about several million miles, it still looked very close. Long solar prominences were spewed out from the sun, and they were 1,000,000 miles long. Some of them looked like the wings of a bird, while some of them long like circular-shaped ears. Being so close to the sun, Qin Mu even felt the strange rays coming from the heat waves of the sun. When the rays hit his body, he felt pain as though the rays were piercing through their bodies. Meanwhile, the wind from the sun was also incomparably scorching. As the wind from the sun came rushing over at a terrifying speed, Qin Mu's heart stirred, and he executed Overlord Body 3 elixir technique. He was mainly trying to borrow the wind of the sun and the rays of the sun to cultivate his corporeal body. All colors of Buddha rays appeared behind his head, and there was also dragon-shaped rays. He had fused 8 voices of ancestral dragon and the Buddha voices into one. With this kind of cultivation method of having the dragon and Buddha as one and the power of the rays and wind from the sun, this resulted in him improving at a godly speed. He just doesn't want to cultivate my sacred secrets of heaven and earth heart. First Ancestor Human Emperor was depressed. On the other side, Ling Yuxiu saw the situation, and she also executed Ancestral Dragon Supreme Mystery Technique and used 8 voices of Ancestral Dragon to temper her body. She blocked down the power of the wind and rays of the sun. On the other hand, Pan Gongzhou executed Anusrava Fighting God Technique to temper his corporeal body too. Qi Shi corrected the star Atlas, and he borrowed the orbit of the sun. The flying ship flew half around the sun, and Qi Shi raised the sails. The sails bulged from the wind and rays of the sun, increasing the speed of the ship instantly. Qin Mu raised his head to look, and he saw that the sails were sewed by the skin of gods. There were also numerous markings, and when the rays of the sun hit on the surface, they couldn't penetrate through the skin, thus borrowing the power to raise the speed to the maximum. Not only that, this flying ship was also flapping its wings, and flames flowered out to raise the speed of the ship higher and higher. Suddenly, over a dozen trails of flames appeared in the starry sky, and the flames in the darkness seemed to be very faint. It was like red lines shooting towards the sun. Dao brother Qi Shi, which kind of god can chase up to this ship of yours? First Ancestor Human Emperor looked at the red lines that had entered the sun, and he suddenly asked. Qi Shi came to the end of the ship, and he looked into the distance. There are many people that can chase up to this ship, for example, the strong races that are the Phoenix race, the Dragon race, the Vermilion Bird race. Other than that, some of the gods under the Great Sun Sovereign also can, as they could borrow the sun to fly at extremely fast speeds. First Ancestor Human Emperor said, "In that case, the ones coming should the gods under Great Sun Sovereign. I wonder if Great Sun Sovereign is among them." The 3 heads of Qi Shi stared intensely at the red lines that were tunneling into the sun. He saw that these red lines moving quickly on the surface of the sun and the terrifying solar prominences were actually increasing their speed. Great Sun Sovereign is not around them. Qi Shi raised his crimson light heaven-suppressing floor and sneered. If Great Sun Sovereign is among these gods, he would already have mobilized the power of the sun to strike us. The 2 of them stood at the aft of the ship, and they saw the speed of the red lines becoming faster and faster. Qi Shi had a nervous expression, but First Ancestor Human Emperor was slightly calm. Suddenly, trails of red light shot out from the sun and went straight for the flying ship. "Be careful!" First Ancestor Human Emperor shouted. "Hide in the building first and locked the doors and windows." Qin Mu hurriedly pulled Ling Yuxiu into the building of the flying ship, and before Pan Gongzhou could even enter, Qin Mu had already closed the door. Pan Gongzhou sneered, and his body suddenly became a shadow to slip into through the door crack. And at this moment, even more red lines were flying towards the sun, and the red lines were streaks of fire. In every fire was a god that was rushing into the sun and flying along the sun's surface at an unimaginably fast speed. This was a huge bottle gourd each, while they carried bows on the claws of their 3 legs too. "This speed is so much faster than Grandpa Cripple." Qin Mu was astonished, and he could soon see that these fire crow gods weren't as fast as they seemed. It was because there was no air in space, there was no resistance, and in addition to that, they had secret skills that could borrow the power of the sun to raise their speed. Thus it was so astonishing. If it was in a place like Eternal Peace, even if these fire crows were faster than Cripple, they couldn't be much faster. However, the most frightening point was still that there were too many fire crow gods. There were only over a dozen before, and now, there were several thousand red lines that were just flying into the sun. It was apparent that these fire crow gods had strange communication methods and they were currently informing their other comrades. As a result, the fire crow gods in the vicinities kept pouring in endlessly. The dozens of fire crow gods in front were already very close to the ship, but they had yet to reach the distance where they could execute divine art. These fire crows then grabbed an arrow out from their quiver and stretched their bows with their 3 legs. The arrows transformed into flowing light to shoot at the flying ship. The fire crows had 3 legs and 3 claws, so the speed at which they pulled the bow was inconceivably fast. Even though there were only over a dozen fire crow gods, in a split second, every god had managed to shoot out several hundred arrows. In that instant, the arrows came raining down like a swarm of locusts. At the aft of the ship, God Chi, she lifted up heaven's suppressing floor, and the treasures in the floor shone brightly. Divine weapons flew out to block down the rain of 1,000,000 arrows. And at this moment, those fire crow gods opened up their vermilion red bottle gourds, and the divine fire of the sun poured out from the bottle gourd to rush at the flying ship, shrouding the entire ship in a split second. Chi she roared and threw up heaven's suppressing floor. Heaven's suppressing floor instantly became incomparably huge and hung in the sky above the flying ship. Under the roof of the building, huge bells started ringing and vibrated the divine fire, making the fire unable to come close to the ship. Those fire crows gods took this chance to rush up onto the ship, and suddenly, 6 divine knives flew out from heaven's suppressing floor. Chi she wielded the divine knives, and he moved as though he was flying, going 1 round around the entire ship in not even a breath's time. Swinging his knives repeatedly, dozens of heads fell onto the ground. And at this moment, several hundred fire crow gods came flapping their wings over, and the arrows were becoming incomparably concentrated as they fired off in unison. Chi she executed heaven's suppressing floor again, but there were numerous divine weapons that got shot down and fell onto the deck. The power of heaven's suppressing floor was greatly reduced. Even though this was a remarkable treasure that suppressed the palace, Chi she's cultivation still wasn't enough to unleash the true power of this treasure. Several hundred fire crow gods opened up their bottle gourds and divine fire came spewing over. Behind them were several thousand fire crow gods that were closing in rapidly. First Ancestor frowned. These fire crow gods were clearly using the battle formations used in war, and since Chi she was only an executioner of Crimson Light era, he didn't have any experience in dealing with battle formation as he never went onto the battlefield before. On the other hand, First Ancestor was also an army deserter on the battlefield, and even though he had learned methods to deal with battle formations before, he had never used any of the methods before. He also had no experience. Against the battle formation of the fire crow gods, both of them were slightly at a loss. The bunch of fire crows gods first shot a rain of arrows before setting fire to burn the ship, tiring Chi she out from trying to guard this and that. While he was trying to block the attacks of the fire crow gods on this side, the fire crow gods on the other side reached and started attacking the wings of the ship. There were also numerous fire crows that came to the bottom of the flying ship and grabbed onto the ship to fly backward, planning to drag the ship away. Some fire crows then flew to the masts and tried to break off the masts. God Chi she was truly frantic, and he shouted, "Dao friend, this is a fire crow formation. I can't break it. Come and reinforce me." First Ancestor Human Emperor was also helpless. He had never faced such a kind of situation before. The fire crow army of several thousand made him felt no matter how he dealt with each other, there was no way to stop the outcome of the flying ship being destroyed. Qin Mu opened the window and he shouted, "First Ancestor, Heaven and Earth Madra. Revolving heaven turning earth and unchanging heart." First Ancestor Human Emperor came to his senses and his hands crossed each other to execute his heaven and earth Madra skills. Instantly, space shifted, and when his Madra burst forth, this entire flying ship became heaven and earth. Sometimes the heaven was above and the earth was below, while sometimes the heaven was below and the earth was above. The speed of the fire crows was astonishing to begin with, and no one would find the chance to attack them. Now that all of these fire crow gods were situated in a space, they started to fall everywhere. Bunch of fire crows spun around without end and the flying ship shook them off. God Chi she was also giddy from being thrown around, and he hurriedly hugged onto a mast in shock. Qin Mu shouted, "Go up the mast!" First Ancestor Human Emperor leaped up and landed on the mast with one leg. Qin Mu's voice came from the building. Sun coiling around mid-heaven flows forever. First Ancestor Human Emperor immediately executed this move from heaven and earth Madra, and instantly, the space rotated and countless fire crow gods were moved by the power of his Madra skills. They tried to stabilize their bodies, but they were pulled apart by a terrifying force, making them caw loudly. A flood of fire crows formed around First Ancestor Human Emperor, and they swirled furiously around him. What's next? First Ancestor Human Emperor asked loudly. Qin Mu's voice rang out. Collapse of heaven and earth, sorrow, autumn phoenix. First Ancestor Human Emperor instantly executed this Madra, and the heaven fell and earth rend. Terrifying force field was collapsing towards him palm, and the fire crow gods that filled the sky was moved by his palm force. They collided with one another in midair to pile up into a huge round ball, opening pure land with 8 trigrams and the heaven and earth, determining 5 elements of earth, water, wind, fire. First Ancestor Human Emperor executed these 2 Madra skills without thinking. With 2 Madras in 4 palms, the 8 trigrams and heaven-earth diagram squashed the ball of flesh formed by the thousands of fire crow gods in the center. Next, fire, water, wind, and earth burst forth, and the power of the fire elements snapped the bones and tendons of countless fire crows. Their bodies were vibrated into pieces, crushed into pieces, sliced into pieces, and incinerated. Next, as a gust blew over, the thousands of fire crows turned into dust to fly behind the ship. First Ancestor Human Emperor was stunned for a moment, and he couldn't believe what he had done. I've broken the formation? And at this moment, Ling Yuxiu and Pan Gongzou's astonished cry came from the building, and First Ancestor Human Emperor was alarmed. He hurriedly dropped down to have a look and saw a fire crow god that had escaped from his heaven and earth Madra tunneling into the window of the building. When Qin Mu had guided him to break the formation, he had opened the window, and this fire crow god must have taken the chance to slip through the window, planning to lay his hands on Qin Mu and the rest. First Ancestor Human Emperor hurriedly rushed in before he could even rush into the window. 2 trails of blood light burst forth from inside, and they had an incomparably terrifying air of murder. First Ancestor hurriedly moved back in a hurry. The fire crow god in the building had its head severed. Qin Mu carried the case and stood there in a daze. He seemed to still be at shock at the power of God Execution mysterious knife. First Ancestor hurriedly rushed in and touched him everywhere while asking worriedly, "Did it attack you in return? If your head chopped off?" He was frightened as he raised a trembling finger. He wanted to push Qin Mu's head, but he was scared a gentle push might cause Qin Mu's head to fall off his neck. Suddenly, Qin Mu smacked his hand away and praised, "What a powerful case! What a powerful sword! Tales of Hurting Gods." Chapter 646, The Mystery of Great Sun Sovereign. Seeing that Qin Mu was unharmed, First Ancestor let out a sigh of relief and instructed earnestly, "This knife is dangerous. It's made from the head of an emperor's throne-strong practitioner, so it's best if you don't use it when you don't need to." Ling Yuxiu still had not recovered from the shock and was touching her body. She only became at ease after she realized her head was still on. At the same time, Pan Gongzou was also touching his head. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief when he realized it didn't drop off. "Ah, what a waste. I didn't take the opportunity to slay Grandmaster." Qin Mu returned the case to his Taotai sack. He squatted down to examine the corpse of the fire crow god, and he saw that the place where the head was cut off had no blood stains. His blood had entirely vanished, as though the blood were cleanly absorbed in an instant, turning him into 2 chunks of dried corpse. It's indeed a dangerous and malevolent weapon. Qin Mu felt his heart palpitating and his muscles twitching. As long as one gets hit by the knife, there's no possibility of survival. The most terrifying thing is that if this divine knife didn't hit the opponent, it would most likely turn to chop its owner. But it's also pretty useful. Slaying a god just like chopping vegetables. First Ancestor Human Emperor was puzzled, and he asked, "I didn't see you cultivating my Madra skills, so why are you so skilled in them that you can even guide me, the founder of these skills?" Qin Mu stood up and stretched his back. He said with a smile, "I have the overlord body. That's why I master everything I learn instantly." First Ancestor Human Emperor's expression turned dim, and he gave off a depressed air. Qin Mu hurriedly said, "Even though I didn't cultivate directly, I have gone through it over 1,000 times in my mind. First Ancestor, your Madra skills ain't bad, but you lack experience against battle formations. I feel I can teach you how to charge and break through enemy lines, and break the formation in the fastest speed. As for breaking through formations, I've learned quite a lot from my grandpa Blind, and I've been through quite a number of battles as well." First Ancestor heard his explanation and became even more depressed. "You teaching me?" He was like a squashed eggplant that became dispirited and miserable. Qin Mu said, "To break a formation, you need to consider everyone else beneath you. The Fire Crow formation earlier looked very powerful, and the 4,800 Fire Crow gods caused the formation skill to transform continuously. When you attack the head, the tail strikes, and when you attack the tail, the head strikes. When you get caught in this formation, you would be overwhelmed and won't be able to lock onto one enemy. At that point, you need to treat them as numbers, a total of 4,800 numbers. When these numbers change their positions, you can soon see through the formation." First Ancestor Human Emperor's interest was sparked. He recalled the fight earlier, and the Fire Crow formation appeared in his mind. When he replaced the Fire Crow gods with numbers, the marvel of this battle formation was seen through by him. In this case, Fire Crow formation would have a rule to abide by. The changes in their formation are too fast. They have a kind of telepathy to communicate with one another, causing the flaw in their formation to only flicker in an instant. How do I break this formation? First Ancestor Human Emperor soon discovered something was wrong, and he sought knowledge sincerely. Qin Mu slowly guided him. "Which move did I tell you to destroy the formation? Revolving heaven, turning earth, and unchanging heart." First Ancestor came to a realization and said with a smile, "When the world spins, space messes up and the numbers are thrown into disorder, so the formation is broken as well." "I see it now." Qin Mu smiled. "Do you understand now? Disciple Unde." First Ancestor Human Emperor suddenly came to his senses and hurriedly shut his mouth. His face reddening, he raised his sleeves to cover his face. Qin Mu's explanation had subconsciously made him feel as though a teacher was giving him pointers and slowly guiding him. This made him automatically say the phrase, "disciple understands." Luckily, he reacted fast and didn't complete this phrase. She cleaned the ship and kept the treasures that had been struck on the ground. He threw the corpses of the Fire Crow gods off the ship and walked over. Fire Crow gods have a strange kind of telepathy that allows them to contact one another even at an extremely long distance. Since these Fire Crow gods have found us, this means that Great Sun Sovereign isn't far away. The rest of the Fire Crow gods won't be able to catch up to us, but Great Sun Sovereign definitely can. "We need to leave immediately." Qin Mu walked on the deck and looked behind. He saw that the Fire Crows, who had been thrown out by First Ancestor Human Emperor, were still chasing relentlessly, but this time, they couldn't borrow the sun to increase their speed. As a result, the distance between them and the ship was gradually growing. "Abandon the ship," Qin Mu suddenly said. "Let's fly to some place where the Fire Crow gods can't see us. Then we can take another ship to leave. We need to abandon this ship before we attract Great Sun Sovereign's attention. Do we have any other ship?" She shook his head, and First Ancestor Human Emperor did likewise. "Senior Qi, you knew there would be enemies pursuing us, so why didn't you prepare another ship? For example, if I refine poison, I would prepare another set for emergencies." Qin Mu shook his head and said, "You guys are too inexperienced in handling matters." Pan Gongtso hurriedly took out a small booklet and wrote down these words from Qin Mu while thinking to himself, "The more I know about him, the easier it is to deal with him." She said, "My Crimson Light God dynasty has been destroyed, and it's already impressive to even have such a ship left." First Ancestor Human Emperor pondered and said, "We cannot abandon the ship. We can only fight. Even though Great Sun Sovereign is powerful, we aren't ordinary as well. We have a chance to shake Great Sun Sovereign off if we injure him." She was slightly hesitant. First Ancestor's performance earlier clearly showed that he had never gone to a battlefield before. He was at a loss when facing the battle formation and even got lectured by Qin Mu. Of course, She wasn't a general, so he didn't know how to deal with the battle formation as well. If it weren't for Qin Mu, who had experienced numerous battles and was skilled in First Ancestor Human Emperor's technique and divine arts, just the Fire Crow formation alone would probably make them upset and discouraged. Great Sun Sovereign was a famous god, and he had honed himself to perfection over centuries. If they got caught up by him, it would probably be hard to defend against him with First Ancestor and Shi's abilities. All of a sudden, Ling Yuxiu said, "Look at that sun!" Everyone on the ship looked at once, and they saw that the sun was transforming. A strange transformation was happening to the sun. The surface of the sun was collapsing inwardly, forming layers over layers of complicated rings that clasped inwards. Looking at it in detail, the rings were formation markings formed from complicated runes. After a short while, an exceptionally complex formation was formed from the outer surface up to the inside. When the markings contracted, a huge pupil could be seen from far away. "Great Sun Sovereign is here," Shi croaked. His nervousness was beyond compare. First Ancestor Human Emperor took in a deep breath and stood at the stern of the ship. He said solemnly, "I might not be unable to beat him if it's a one-on-one. Since we can't escape the pursuit of Great Sun Sovereign, we might as well injure him heavily and scare him away." Qin Mu looked at the sun that was transforming continuously, and he couldn't help being stunned. Suddenly, he took out his sun jade eye and examined it. He then looked at the sun and cried out, "The person coming is really Great Sun Sovereign? Definitely Great Sun Sovereign." Shi placed heaven-suppressing floor in the sky above the flying ship. He rushed into the building, heading straight to the topmost floor, and took down the important treasure. He said seriously, "Other than him, no one else has the power to mobilize the power of the sun." Qin Mu's consciousness was a little messed up as he muttered, "But why is the formation structure in Sun Jade Eye almost the same with the formation structure of this sun? This Jade Eye is a treasure from High Emperor era, and Great Sun Sovereign should have existed during Dragon Han era, right? So why is he executing the formation skill of High Emperor era?" Ling Yuxiu said, "Great Sun Sovereign has been through High Emperor era, so he can learn their formation divine arts. What's surprising about it?" "No, that's not right." Qin Mu shook his head. "Divine arts rely on the path, and after one's technique is determined, one would basically continue forward on their own path. No matter how much they learned about others' divine arts, they would never reach the peak. Grandmaster is an example." Pangong Tso's fury couldn't be contained as he shouted, "Qin brat, can you think about others' feelings when giving examples? You and I are on the same ship after all. Grandmaster originally cultivates shaman spells, and he is a rare great master in shaman spells. His cultivation in the soul and the primordial spirit is also rare in this world. However, he got distracted and went to learn Dao Sect's Dao Sword, Great Thunderclap Monastery's Dharma, Heavenly Saint Cult's techniques, and Little Jade Capital's technique, so his abilities are all half-baked." Qin Mu made his deduction and said, "If I'm Great Sun Sovereign, I would learn the formation skills of High Emperor era, but I would change it to make it most suitable for me. But this Great Sun Sovereign didn't change anything, so this isn't logical. Besides, I heard from Senior Qi and First Ancestor that he is a god born from the sun, and that's even more impossible for him to learn the divine arts of High Emperor era. He couldn't learn it at all." Ling Yuxiu was confused. Why won't he be able to learn it? They are born from the sun, and the great Tao in his body had already been fixed. Meanwhile, reform starts with changing the divine arts. Changing the divine arts changes the law, and changing the law changes the path. When the paths, skills, and divine arts change, the great Tao will change as well. Qin Mu explained further, "The great Tao and Great Sun Sovereign will never change, and he naturally wouldn't be able to learn the paths, skills, and divine arts that have already been changed. It's like Earth Count. Earth Count is also a pre-celestial god, so he shouldn't be able to learn King Yama's paths, skills, and divine arts. From a great distance, the formation of the sun had already been formed. A thick beam of light broke out all of a sudden from the restraint of space and shone towards the flying ship. When that beam of light passed through a star, the star was instantly pierced, and a huge hole appeared on it. This power was countless times stronger than the power of Sun Jade Eye. On the stern of the ship, First Ancestor Human Emperor and Qi were extremely nervous, while Qin Mu was just walking to and fro as he plucked the hair under his chin. If my guess is correct, this great Sun Sovereign isn't the original Sun Sovereign. He's merely a god of High Emperor era. In that case, where has the true Great Sun Sovereign gone to? First Ancestor, can you get some of Great Sun Sovereign's blood so I can research it? She was flustered and exasperated at the same time. It's not bad at all if we could protect our lives. First Ancestor Human Emperor shouted, "Hide in the cabin, quickly." Qin Mu sprinted towards the cabin while Ling Yuxiu stood on it. Pangong Tso was about to lock Qin Mu outside, but Ling Yuxiu grabbed him by the neck and smashed him on the ground. Qin Mu quickly rushed into the cabin, and just as he was about to close the door, he heard a loud bang. Violent tremors came over and threw the three of them up into the air, colliding here and there. On the stern, First Ancestor Human Emperor unsheathed the sword from his waist and executed all of his magic power to slash down. Jade Brightness' sword expanded and broke through the intense light, but it was instantly scorched red-hot. First Ancestor was forced to retreat continuously. Meanwhile, Qi executed the treasure that suppressed the heaven-suppressing floor. They were 6 divine swords, and they slashed at the divine light. His abilities weren't enough, but the power of these 6 divine swords was too strong, forcefully raising his abilities by a huge chunk. The two of them allied together and they finally blocked the power from the Sun Divine Eye. The intense flames and divine rays were split into 2 by both of them, causing those flames and rays to graze the sides of the ship. They left behind 2 long traces that shone brightly. Right at this moment, the flying ship came to an abrupt stop. A bird head and human body god with 3 legs had ridden over on the divine light and landed on the stern of the ship. He was none other than Great Sun Sovereign. Inside the cabin, Qin Mu hollered, "First Ancestor, remember to get some of his blood. Stop talking." First Ancestor couldn't help but feel frustrated. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 647, Collapse of Heaven, Disappearance of Earth. The remaining survivors of 2 dynasties are actually on this ancient ship. Great Sun Sovereign's physique was very tall and sturdy, and he was like a huge bird perched on the ship. His 3 eyes opened as he looked down, tilting his bird head toward Qi and First Ancestor Human Emperor. He then looked at the building curiously and said with a smile, "After capturing you guys, I will be able to find the way to Carefree Village, taking down all of the remaining survivors in one go. This is truly effortless. Who was the one that wanted my blood?" "Me." Qin Mu opened the window and raised his hands. "Sun Sovereign, it's me. I'm here." Great Sun Sovereign smiled at him. "You are already dead." Qin Mu hurriedly touched his body and realized he was still okay. "I'm still alive and well. How am I dead?" Great Sun Sovereign said leisurely, "In my eyes, you brats are already dead. Only these 2 friends that dare to fight against me will be spared. And that's because I want to find Carefree Village and the floating world." Without any warning, Pangong Tso rushed forward and closed the windows with a loud bang. The window was pushed open again, and Qin Mu popped his head out with a smile. "But we are clearly still alive." Great Sun Sovereign's pupils contracted, and he sneered, "You will die very soon." Bang! Pangong Tso closed the window again. The window creaked open once more, and Qin Mu popped his head out. "Then why do you say we're already dead? We're clearly still able to talk, laugh, and jump around, so your words don't make any sense." Great Sun Sovereign frowned and flames burst forth from his 3 eyes. He wanted to kill this brat now. Qin Mu promptly closed the window. His laughter was heard from the cabin. "He thought I would be scared shitless, but he got speechless from just a couple of sentences from me. Look at his face turning green." More voices even came from inside the cabin. "Lord Qin, Grandpa Qin, please stop talking, okay? I'm begging you." He even used his eyeballs to stare at me. "Stop talking. Grandmaster, even if you kneel and beg me, he will not let you off. So why don't you just scold until you're satisfied?" Before the divine rays from Great Sun Sovereign's eyes even shot out, First Ancestor Human Emperor slashed down at him with one sword. Great Sun Sovereign raised a claw to parry this sword, and said with a smile, "Sloppy sword skills." When his sharp claw blocked the sword, his expression changed slightly. He hurriedly pulled back his claw, and the divine light in his eyes shot towards First Ancestor's sword. He said coldly, "The sword is a good sword though." His claws got almost severed by Jade Brightness' sword, and he was lucky he pulled them back just in time. First Ancestor swung his sword back into its sheath and used Heaven and Earth Madra to block the power of the three gazes. On the other side, God Chi-Shi rushed at him. 6 sword lights danced, bearing down on Great Sun Sovereign along with the heaven-suppressing floor behind him. Great Sun Sovereign received First Ancestor Human Emperor's Madra skill with a bare hand. He gave off a look of astonishment as Chi-Shi pounced over, and he immediately flapped his wings to avoid the sword lights and the heaven-suppressing floor. First Ancestor Human Emperor and Chi-Shi leaped out of the flying ship, fighting Great Sun Sovereign fiercely in the starry sky. Great Sun Sovereign opened his wings, and numerous fire crow gods flew out from them, flapping their wings toward the flying ship. He smirked and said, "Little ones in the cabin, you guys can die now." The moment these fire crow gods landed on the flying ship, they immediately charged at the cabin. However, the door suddenly opened, and Qin Mu stood at the center with a case in his hands. Behind him, Pangong Tso and Ling Yuxiu quickly closed their eyes and didn't dare to look. They only heard a soft sound, and suddenly, overflowing fierce aura burst forth as though some bloodthirsty existence had awakened and wanted to eat people. The jade-like head in the case suddenly opened its eyes and revealed a look of excitement. The membranes behind the head that were connected to the case opened up like a fan and vibrated rapidly. 2 beams of blood light shot out from the eyes of this head and swept randomly like roaming dragons. An ominous silence fell over the ship. The several hundred fire crow gods that were about to attack paused, standing motionlessly on the spot. When the 2 beams of light retracted and gradually sank back inside, Qin Mu closed the case. The dense scent of blood almost knocked Qin Mu out, and this made his heart jump. A burping sound came from the case, and he didn't know if it was just a hallucination. Meanwhile, outside the cabin, those fire crow gods were still frozen on the spot. Suddenly, the pulses from First Ancestor Human Emperor, Chi-Shi, and Great Sun Sovereign's divine arts came over, causing their heads and bodies to become separated. Their heads slid off their necks and fell to the ground. Thumping sounds rang out as the corpses collapsed at once. "The one that herds cows. There's an air of blood around you." Ling Yuxiu opened her eyes and saw instantly a blood-red fog coiling around Qin Mu. Qin Mu was taken aback. He lowered his head to look at his body, and he saw a faintly discernible fog that floated around him. This red fog was like gas, but he couldn't feel it. They could be seen, however, with the naked eye. It was indeed a strange thing. "You are plagued by the air of blood, Cult Master Qin. You are fortunate." Pangong Tso smiled. "You have killed a lot of gods. There are several hundreds of them, right? Their spirits have latched onto you, so you will definitely die." Qin Mu acted as though he wanted to open the case, and Pangong Tso's expression changed drastically. He escaped in a hurry. "This air of blood should belong to the case, so why is it plaguing me instead? If I don't feed it, will I be the next one to die?" Qin Mu felt uneasy. He also couldn't see what was going on with this air of blood, but he could faintly feel a connection between it and the case. Suddenly, the air of blood became like dense smoke as it tunneled into the heart of his brows. The air of blood went into his third eye, and soon it got absorbed. A burp came from his third eye. Qin Mu tilted his head to the side. A burp came from the case, and a burp also came from his eye. There were indeed a lot of weird things happening in this world. In the world inside Qin Mu's third eye, a sinister voice rang out. "Who dares to steal my food? That brat is a ration I've taken a liking to. You actually dare to steal my blood fiends? I'm going to eat you." Qin Fengqing sucked this air of blood like a noodle and gave a burp. He then swung his fist at the sky and roared, "How dare you act fierce toward me? As soon as I escape from this place, I'll smash you into a pulp and eat you." In the starry sky outside the ship, a massive battle had erupted. The flying ship was pushed further and further away by the pulses of their divine arts. During the fight between Great Sun Sovereign, First Ancestor, and Qi, the latter had a 1,000-storied heaven-suppressing floor above his head while wielding 6 swords. His corporeal body divine art was incomparably strong, and he was exceptionally fierce when he fought. On top of that, Qin Mu's eye power couldn't clearly see the speed of Qi attacks. He was extremely fast. This person had 3 heads and 6 arms. His 6 swords were all top-notch divine weapons, and his battle method was wild. The speed of his close combat abilities was beyond compare. His abilities were inferior to Great Sun Sovereign and First Ancestor Human Emperors, so he could only rely on his heaven-suppressing floor to be able to block Great Sun Sovereign's attacks. A body with 3 heads and 6 arms was definitely the strongest corporeal body. For an ordinary person, having one more arm would bring about a massive change. One could master even more techniques. Every additional arm would accumulate and multiply the power of each attack, and his 3 heads and 6 arms had completely developed all the methods of close combat. Qin Mu walked out of the cabin and stood at the stern of the ship. He couldn't help sighing, and he exclaimed inwardly, "Crimson Light Era doesn't have a lot of attainments in divine arts, but their attainments in their corporeal bodies were truly astonishing. Every increase in an arm or a head was equivalent to adding another move on the 14 basic sword moves. Looks like we underestimated the Anasrava fighting god technique that Pangongtso is cultivating. In Great Ruins, they saw god statues with numerous heads and arms. Crimson Light Era must have inspired the corporeal body techniques that these gods with 3 heads and 6 arms had cultivated. From this, one could imagine how high the attainments in corporeal body were during Crimson Light Era. However, more than half of Great Sun Sovereign's power was still focused on First Ancestor Human Emperor. The first time the two of them clashed, Sun Sovereign instantly felt the astonishing power of First Ancestor. First Ancestor Human Emperor's Madra skills could take on his attacks, and this made him feel threatened. As for Qi, even though he caused him a lot of trouble, his battle power was far from First Ancestor. Great Sun Sovereign's battle methods also opened Qin Mu's horizons. This god's 3 legs were all bird legs that had sharp claws. In space, the sharp claws were like the sharpest weapons, and he had no trouble splitting mountains and rocks. He also had 2 wings that flapped loudly. They moved extremely fast, enabling him to move around in all directions, and they could slash down like divine knives splitting the sky. Furthermore, they even had endless fire energy. This pair of wings vibrated as he moved here and there. This made Great Sun Sovereign's moving speed extremely fast. It was so fast that Qi and Fire Ancestor couldn't catch up with him. Aside from wings, he had 2 arms and hands, and the latter executed divine arts. Whenever a Madra was executed, a sun would leap out of his palm and explode. Flames would fill the space like small suns. In addition to those body parts, his beak was also a mighty weapon. When he pecked down, he could definitely poke holes in First Ancestor and Qi head if they weren't able to dodge it. What was even more terrifying was his 3 eyes. The formation skill hidden in those eyes could shoot out divine light similar to Sun Jade eyes when activated, and the power was countless times stronger. Qi's 3 heads and 6 arms made his battle methods extremely complicated, and Great Sun Sovereign's battle methods were no inferior too. With his great pair of wings, his body moved like lightning. His claws, wings, hands, beak, and eyes were all in sync to deliver the perfect blows to First Ancestor and Qi. After a while, he covered both of them with injuries. If this continues, First Ancestor and Qi will die under his hands. Qin Mu's eyes became dazzled. He wanted to open the small case and use God Execution Mysterious Knife to assist them, but their speed was too fast. Great Sun Sovereign's speed, in particular, was even higher than First Ancestor and Qi, so releasing the Divine Knife would probably slay First Ancestor or Qi instead. Of course, there was also the possibility that it couldn't hit any one of them, and the knife would turn to Qin Mu instead. Suddenly, Great Sun Sovereign flew above Qi's head, and his 3 claws grabbed the 1,000-storied heaven-suppressing floor. He lifted this building and threw it far away. Crap! Qin Mu was shocked. The color drained from Qi-Shi's face as he saw Great Sun Sovereign's wings slashing down at him. He hurriedly blocked with his 6 swords and received this attack. His body tumbled, and he got struck into the dark space below them. At the same time, First Ancestor Human Emperor struck one Madra on the back of Great Sun Sovereign's heart. Layers of feathers tunneled out from Great Sun Sovereign's back and blocked this Madra of his. However, he still coughed up blood despite his successful block. His head turned around, and he opened his mouth to spew out the Sun Divine Fire. Sun Divine Fire descended from the sky like a waterfall, and at the same time, sharp divine rays from his 3 gazes also shot out. First Ancestor Human Emperor's expression turned dim, and his depressed aura became denser and denser. Great Sun Sovereign suddenly felt a dangerous atmosphere, and the divine feathers on his body stood up on their ends. He endured taking a palm from First Ancestor Human Emperor just to strike Qi-Shi away. He wanted to fight First Ancestor alone. First Ancestor's abilities were the strongest, so only by getting rid of him could he achieve complete victory. However, it was apparent that First Ancestor got hold of the upper hand now. He immediately decided to use his final move. Qin Mu looked from afar, and his expression was grim. He said in a low voice, "The first form of 3 forms of overturning heaven, collapse of heaven, disappearance of earth." First Ancestor Human Emperor's 3 forms of overturning heaven were the 3 moves that Qin Mu had never mastered. It wasn't because Qin Mu's comprehension wasn't enough. It was because these 3 Madra skills need one to have the courage to die with heaven and earth. Qin Mu couldn't do it. On the flying ship, Qin Mu saw the starry sky becoming bright as a radiant celestial heavens appeared under First Ancestor's feet. As the sun and moon rose, the stars shone gorgeously before the sky collapsed. The sun and moon were destroyed, and the stars fell like rain. The destruction of heaven and earth actually looked so beautiful and heroic at that moment. Qin Mu's expression changed drastically. He carried the case and turned back to run in no time. When he dashed toward the cabin, Ling Yuxiu had already opened the door, and she was about to step out. A few moments ago, she plucked up her courage and decided to go outside to look at the situation. Without any explanation, Qin Mu ran straight at her and threw her onto his shoulder, carrying her like a sack of potatoes as he rushed inside the cabin. Boom! Terrifying vibrations came over, and both of them were thrown up high to the ceiling. The flying ship spun furiously, and creaking sounds came from the body of the ship. Snapping sounds could also be heard. Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu's blood ran cold. This important treasure of Crimson Light era could break apart at any time. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 648. Hard to differentiate between enemy and foe. The flying ship was like a small boat on a stormy sea, getting smacked left and right by the raging waves. Suddenly, the windows broke apart and flew out of the ship. Whoosh! The floor was splintered into pieces and flew away as well. Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu hurriedly hugged the pillar in the cabin, only to hear creaking sounds coming from it. "Hug my waist!" Qin Mu shouted. Ling Yuxiu didn't hear him clearly. "What? Hug my waist?" Ling Yuxiu finally heard it this time. She let go of the pillar and hugged his waist. Qin Mu felt 2 soft lumps on his back, and they were very comfortable. However, he didn't have time to think about what was soft. He immediately executed Heaven and Earth Madra skill, revolving heaven turning earth and unchanging heart. When this Madra skill was executed, violent wave motions were instantly triggered by his palm and started to swirl around him. Qin Mu grunted as his arms almost snapped from the pressure that was coming from his hands. However, he could only continue to hold on. Suddenly, the pillar that was holding up the cabin snapped and the entire building flew up, falling into the starry sky. Ling Yuxiu was shocked, and she hurriedly hugged Qin Mu as tightly as possible. Qin Mu exhausted all his strength to execute Heaven and Earth Madra, and he was withstanding stronger and stronger wave motions. The flying ship was still tumbling furiously around, and the phoenix head on the bow had already broken off. The deck boards were rattling and splintering as they flew out continuously. The entire ship was worn out. Bang! The door to the ship's hold shattered apart, and Pan Gong Tso's startled cry came from inside. Ling Yuxiu heard this voice and thought to herself, Pan Gongzhou is truly quick-witted to have hidden in the ship's hold earlier. Did he foresee the incoming danger? Pan Gongzhou was tumbling around, and he crashed here and there. The wave motions stopped all of a sudden, but the ship was still spiraling continuously, not knowing when it would finally stop. Qin Mu's hands crossed, transforming his madra into determining 5 elements of earth, water, wind, fire. After a moment, the flying ship gradually stopped. His face was flushed, and his skin had nearly cracked apart, but he finally stabilized the ship. Qin Mu dispersed heaven and earth madra. His legs were still shaking, and his hands were cramped and couldn't lift them up. His waist seemed like they were about to split apart, and it was so painful that he was sucking in cold breath. The flying ship was wrecked. The 3 pairs of wings had already broken off from the 6 pairs. The phoenix head was also severed, and the mast had collapsed. The sails were full of many holes, and the entire cabin was gone. Air was leaking out from all over the ship, and even the air in the flying ship was depleting quickly. It must be because the vital qi shroud on this flying ship had been broken. Qin Mu struggled to take a step. He headed straight for the vital qi shroud of the flying ship and mended the tear. After a while, he landed back and sighed in relief. It should be able to last us for a while. I wonder how First Ancestor is? Sister Xiao, you can let go already. Ling Yuxiu's face flushed, and she quickly let go of his waist. When Qin Mu was running to mend the vital qi shroud, she was still hugging him, and this made Qin Mu run 1 round while dragging her along. Qin Mu endured the soreness on his body while checking their location and direction. He saw that they were in an unfamiliar starry sky that had no distinction between up and down. There were no 6 directions, and when he looked into the distance, he couldn't see the battlefield of First Ancestor and Great Sun Sovereign. Not only could he not see the battlefield, but even that sun that the flying ship had revolved around also couldn't be seen as well. Qin Mu felt chill creeping in his heart. He hurriedly grabbed the wisdom beads on his neck and rubbed them twice. He composed himself and said, "It's best for us not to walk around randomly. We should stay on the spot and wait for First Ancestor or Qi Shi to find their way here." Ling Yuxiu looked around and muttered, "What if they can't find us? What if they can't find us? Our air is going to be depleted before that happens." Qin Mu took out a bunch of medicinal seeds and some soil from his Taotai sack. He scattered the seeds on the soil and executed Earth Aeon creation technique. He saw that these medicinal seeds sprouted and grew rapidly. Soon, there was a garden on the remaining deck of the ship. He stretched out his 5 fingers and a ball of flames flew up from his hands. It was a small sun that was formed by qi of pure yang, and he used the sunlight to shine on these lush green herbs. His qi of pure yang was much denser than others because he had traveled 40,000 years back in time to meet that god that had died in High Emperor era. He had gifted him 2 trails of divine qi, one was pure yang, and the other was pure yin. After creating a small sun, Qin Mu did the same thing with his other hand to create a small moon. He said in a low voice, "I hope this can last for some time." Pan Gongzhou crawled out from the ship's hold and saw everything. When he noticed Qin Mu had actually stored a pile of soil in his Taotai sack, he cried out, "Cult Master Qin, you even have soil in your Taotai sack? I've prepared these in case of emergencies." Qin Mu released the small sun and small moon from his palms, and they orbited around the herb garden. "I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to grow herbs if I'm in a place like a desert, so I prepared some. I didn't expect that I'll use them here." Pan Gongzhou had a weird expression, and he sighed. "Now I know why I can't kill you." Qin Mu endured the pain on his body and said with a smile, "You have never defeated me before, much less kill me." Pan Gongzhou's face turned black, and he stopped talking. He didn't dare to make a move as well. Qin Mu pondered for a moment. 3 of us depleting the air here is not slower than 2 of us depleting the air. So, Pan Gongzhou's expression changed drastically. He was about to escape when the ship suddenly sank. All of them frantically looked behind, and their faces paled at what they saw. Great Sun Sovereign, who was filled with holes, was standing on the stern of the ship. One of his wings was broken, and his leg was also crippled. He was covered in injuries and 2 out of his 3 eyes seemed to be blind. All in all, he looked miserable. Cough, cough. He coughed violently and spat out a mouthful of flaming phlegm, which burned continuously even after landing on the ground. This part of the divine ship was burnt. What a strong founding emperor divine art. Great Sun Sovereign grimaced in pain and sucked in a deep breath. The blood flowed continuously from his body. He chuckled. He almost took my life, but only almost. What did I say? Oh right, you are already dead. His remaining eye opened, and there seemed to be a huge sun brewing divine fire in it. Qin Mu immediately grabbed the small case and opened it without any warning. 2 streaks of blood light beamed towards Great Sun Sovereign and slashed down at him. Great Sun Sovereign's tattered wings suddenly unfurled and covered his body, and the 2 streaks of light swirled around him. Countless feathers were slashed off, and blood splattered out. Ouch! Great Sun Sovereign's astonished and furious voice came from inside the feathers. Qin Mu's heart turned cold. God Execution Mysterious Knife couldn't slay this Great Sun Sovereign who was already heavily injured. What made him feel even more despair was that if Great Sun Sovereign could appear here, was First Ancestor Human Emperor already dead. Those 2 streaks of light turned back without achieving their goal, and the case clasped shut. Without God Execution Stage, a mere God Execution Mysterious Knife can't do anything to me. Great Sun Sovereign spread his wings and blood flowed down from them. His blood landed on the deck and instantly ignited it. After a short while, the stern of the ship was covered entirely with divine fire. The air rapidly depleted, and not long after, Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu found it hard to breathe. Great Sun Sovereign walked over while panting heavily. The head of an emperor's throne-strong practitioner still needs the God Execution Stage to be able to execute its flawless killing power. It's a pity you didn't receive that mountain. Now you guys can die. Suddenly, the flying ship jolted, and Great Sun Sovereign's body froze. His head twisted back, and he saw a slender figure bathed in flames walking over with a divine sword in his hand. The tip of the sword was pointing diagonally at the deck. The divine fire was instantly extinguished when the tip of the sword brushed past it. Only pools of golden blood remained. You're still not dead? Great Sun Sovereign's remaining eye revealed a look of terror as he slowly retreated. He suddenly flapped his wings and soared into the sky. The pain from his wings made him shriek miserably as he flew away like a beam of light. First Ancestor Human Emperor's face was pale. He stretched out his hands to clap and said in a low voice, "Green Vitality Creation." The ship suddenly became like a withered tree that was welcoming spring again. The wooden structure of the ship rapidly sprouted with tree seedlings, and huge and towering trees grew furiously in the blink of an eye. It was like a primitive forest. The flying ship transformed into a tiny planet, growing trees in all directions as it floated alone in the starry sky. First Ancestor Human Emperor walked before Qin Mu and the rest, and he said indifferently, "Dao friend Qi Shi, until when are you going to hide? If you have made your move earlier, we could have fought Great Sun Sovereign to his death and not let him escape." Qi Shi suddenly appeared on the bow of the ship while dragging his heaven-suppressing floor. His 3 faces and 6 eyes stared at First Ancestor. "I'm also heavily injured. I could have fought him to the death, but I wouldn't survive as well. Since he has already escaped, he won't dare to return anymore. He won't be able to catch up to us if he returns as well. We have already achieved our goal, so there's no need to risk our lives. How are your injuries?" His tone seemed to be slightly concerned, and Qin Mu felt fear. Qi Shi's question at this time is off. He's definitely up to no good. As long as he kills First Ancestor, Crimson Light taking over Eternal Peace would be extremely easy. Qi Shi's intention to kill has been roused. The reason why Qi Shi was willing to ally with Eternal Peace was because of First Ancestor Human Emperor's existence. He had the ability that Eternal Peace had to ally with Crimson Light God Dynasty. If First Ancestor were to die, there would be no need for an alliance. He could just take over Eternal Peace. First Ancestor Human Emperor said, "How heavy my injuries are? You will know if you try." Qin Mu grabbed the small case and said with a smile, "Senior Qi Shi, We are still in an alliance after all. It wouldn't be good to fall out. She stared at the small case in his hands, and he suddenly smiled. That's right. I'm just concerned, and I mean no harm. Disciple, come over here. Pan Gongtso walked closer to him and said in a hushed voice, First Ancestor Human Emperor is heavily injured. If we can seize God Execution Mysterious Knife, we will be able to do anything to them. She shook his head. I know his injuries are very severe, but my injuries aren't light as well. I don't have any confidence to deal with God Execution Mysterious Knife. Let's wait for my body to recover first. First Ancestor Human Emperor fell into a sitting position, and Qin Mu examined his injuries, frowning slightly as he did. The injuries on First Ancestor's body were extremely serious. He was like a porcelain vase that was about to crack completely. These injuries were from 3 forms of overturning heaven. 3 forms of overturning heaven was a divine art with a strong sense of self-destruction. He didn't know how many moves First Ancestor had executed, but the injuries on his corporeal body and primordial spirit were all severe. Even his divine treasures and the celestial palace at the end of his divine bridge had numerous cracks. The most serious injury that Qin Mu had treated was still Imperial Preceptor's injuries from the battle with Jade Sovereign. However, Imperial Preceptor didn't have his celestial palace damaged at that time. Now, First Ancestor Human Emperor had injuries all the way to his celestial palace. Sending healing energy to the celestial palace to treat its injuries was still something that Qin Mu had not yet learned and experienced. I can treat as I go. I need to treat his other injuries first. After that, I'll think of a way to treat his celestial palace's injuries. Qin Mu handed the small case to Ling Yuxiu and taught her how to activate and release God Execution Mysterious Knife. He instructed in a low voice, If Qi walks over, open the case right away. Don't hesitate. Ling Yuxiu nodded slowly. She hugged the case while reviewing Qin Mu's instructions in her mind. Qin Mu took in a deep breath, and he immediately started to gather the herbs to refine the spirit pills. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 649 Qin Mu's Big Eye Monsters. How should I treat a celestial palace? Qin Mu treated First Ancestor's corporeal body, and it took 2 days to nurse his divine treasures. The spirit herbs that he lacked were planted by him straight away. Even though First Ancestor's corporeal body had healed, his complexion was becoming worse and worse, and he would frequently fall into a coma. This was because the injuries on his primordial spirit and celestial palace were too severe, and Qin Mu was utterly helpless when it comes to them. Apothecary had imparted medical knowledge and expertise to him. He could treat strong practitioners that were on Divine Bridge Realm and those that had not yet reached Southern Heavenly Gate. However, for injuries on the Celestial Palace of God Realm, it was also an unknown territory for Apothecary. Moreover, the Silver Needle couldn't move any further to reach the Celestial Palace, so how to guide the medicinal energy was also a huge problem. Steaming or boiling bath wasn't possible, as well as they couldn't seep into the Celestial Palace. As for spirit pills and miraculous medicines, their medicinal energy couldn't reach the Celestial Palace directly. First Ancestor's primordial spirit was no longer in his spirit embryo divine treasure. It was located in the Celestial Palace. Taking a rough guess, his cultivation had most likely reached the realm of God Execution Stage or Jade Capital. However, to know his exact cultivation, Qin Mu would need to enter First Ancestor Human's Celestial Palace. First Ancestor Human Emperor's state was already terrible, and he could no longer release his primordial spirit for Qin Mu to treat. For this reason, he could only enter the Celestial Palace if he wanted to treat him. I can still transform into a shadow to enter his divine treasures and push the medicine energy, but I can't enter Southern Heavenly Gate. Qin Mu quickly walked in circles around First Ancestor while calculating carefully. Southern Heavenly Gate was an important pass. It was a pass for a god to become a true god, and one's primordial spirit needed to have the power of a true god to be able to enter. Even though great educational Heavenly Devil scriptures had all kinds of strange techniques, no matter how intricate the technique was, they had to abide by a basic principle, and that was the cultivation realm. Qin Mu's cultivation was far from being able to enter Southern Heavenly Gate. First Ancestor Human Emperor fainted again, and it wasn't known what dream he was having. He just kept murmuring delirious words. I've sinned. I won't escape anymore. I've come here to redeem myself. I'm sorry. Qin Mu frowned. This way of losing consciousness was extremely bad, as this meant First Ancestor's primordial spirit was already starting to disintegrate. Treatment could no longer be delayed. He had to send the medicinal energy to the Celestial Palace as soon as possible. I can't cross Southern Heavenly Gate, but there's something that can go through it. Qin Mu quickly refined the pills for treating injuries of the primordial spirit. He made a large number of pills, then stored all of them. He said to Ling Yuxiu, Sister Xiu, I'm going to treat First Ancestor's injuries. Stay here and be careful of Qi Shi. Ling Yuxiu nodded her head while holding the small case nervously. Qin Mu's body suddenly transformed into a shadow and tunneled into the heart of First Ancestor's brows. He flew past Spirit Embryo, 5 Elements, and 6 Directions Divine Treasure. After a long time, he finally reached Divine Bridge Divine Treasure. He stood on First Ancestor Human Emperor's Divine Bridge and saw that the light in this place was like a rainbow. Meanwhile, below the Divine Bridge, the Divine Treasures were interlocking and overlapping one another. The Dark Yudu was below the 6 Directions, and over there was Life and Death Divine Treasure. Qin Mu composed himself and headed to the place on the other end of the Divine Bridge. It was First Ancestor's Celestial Palace. While he was walking on the bridge, he couldn't help being stunned when he noticed that First Ancestor Human Emperor's Divine Bridge was completely intact and connected. It wasn't broken at all. The divine bridges of all divine arts practitioners in Eternal Peace Empire were broken. Even if one used Secrets of Magpie Bridge and Secrets of Mysterious Guide, there would still be a detached portion. That was why they had to use Secrets of Divine Crossing to reach the other shore. On the other hand, First Ancestor Human Emperor's Divine Bridge was flawless. Indeed, he is the same as me. We're both born from Founding Emperor's bloodline. Our divine bridges aren't broken. Qin Mu walked forward, and after a long time, he arrived at the end of the Divine Bridge. Before him, Southern Heavenly Gate stood in the clouds. It was majestic and vast. This Southern Heavenly Gate was the door to the Celestial Palace, and the clouds around him formed all kinds of shapes. Goat's horns, dragon, vermilion bird, and black tortoise. There were also thunder marking, wind marking, and all sorts of strange markings. The door brought immense pressure to Qin Mu, and its weight was abnormal. If he entered this door, his primordial spirit wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure. It would break apart. Qin Mu composed himself. He took out his Taotai sack and rummaged through it, taking out 2 jade eyes. Moon Jade Eye and Sun Jade Eye. Qin Mu pondered for a moment while gritting his teeth. He executed 10,000 Spirit Nature technique, trying to grant intelligence to these 2 jade eyes. His attainments in 10,000 Spirit Nature technique weren't high, as he had only skimmed through it. Because of this, he wasn't entirely sure if he could grant them intelligence. After waiting for a long time, his 2 jade eyes still didn't move. Qin Mu frowned slightly. He was about to execute 10,000 Spirit Nature technique again when several pops sounded out from the jade eyes. After 2 popping sounds, 2 skinny legs grew out from the huge eyeballs, and 2 skinny arms grew out above the eyes after another couple of pops. One of the eyeballs stretched its back and cried out, I'm dying from holding back my laughter. Brother, don't stifle yourself to death. Qin Mu was startled, and the Sun Jade Eye beside him burst into laughter. With 2 skinny arms holding its huge eyeball, he laughed until he rolled around on the ground. Moon Jade Eye also guffawed until it knelt on the ground while its 2 skinny arms smacked wildly on the ground. He thought he didn't awaken us and planned to awaken us once more. The 2 huge eyeballs rolled around on the ground again. Qin Mu's face turned black. All right, that's enough. Stop laughing. Laugh again, and I will smack you back into your original forms. The 2 jade eyes shut their mouths at once and stood up properly with their thin legs. I feel our legs may be a little too skinny. I'm always afraid they would snap. Sun Jade Eye's huge eyeball looked down and tried to look at his legs. But how could he see? Jarrrrrk. Sun Jade Eye rolled out and tumbled over a dozen rounds before stopping. Moon Jade, I was overjoyed at this sight and laughed until he knelt again while smacking the ground crazily. Qin Mu's palms trembled as he fiercely plucked off 2 strands of his beard. He shouted, "Have you 2 played enough? I summoned you 2 not to see you guys fool around." The 2 jade eyes immediately stood together, listening obediently. Qin Mu took out the spirit pills and miraculous medicine that he had made and wrapped them in a huge sack. "After you guys enter the door, just bring these spirit pills to First Ancestor's primordial spirit and catalyze these medicinal energy." He was about to hand these spirit pills to the 2 jade eyes when he suddenly came to a realization. Looks like my 10,000 spirit nature technique isn't honed to perfection yet, so everything I summoned isn't too reliable. Back then, the chest I summoned always likes to collect bones and corpses. Then the sand dune giant that I summoned in the desert of High Emperor only knows how to roar. His speed is also extraordinarily slow. Would these 2 fellows be unreliable too? He pondered for a moment, then took out a spirit pill. "Try catalyzing this medicinal energy." Moon Jade, I suddenly shot a beam of light and sliced the spirit pill into 2 halves. Before Qin Mu had the chance to react, a beam of flame shot out and transformed the 2 halves into dust. "That's not the way to catalyze it," Qin Mu said patiently. "You guys are pure yin and pure yang. Yin and yang must work together, so you should cooperate and catalyze the medicinal energy. Here, I'll show you." He took out a spirit pill and his eyes transformed. With his left eye that was pure yang and his right eye that was pure yin, 2 beams of light shone on the spirit pills at the same time. The medicinal energy of the spirit pills was instantly catalyzed, and fragrance assaulted his nostrils. "Try again, and both of you do it at the same time." The 2 jade eyes turned the spirit pill into ashes again, and Qin Mu guided them patiently to control their strength. After several attempts, they only succeeded once. Qin Mu got them to test over a dozen more times, and the success rate gradually increased. He finally let out a sigh of relief. 40 to 50% success rate is acceptable. After you guys go in, catalyze the spirit pills one by one. Don't catalyze them all in one go. If you fail, all the work will be for nothing. Remember, don't fool around. You must catalyze the spirit pills or else I'll beat you 2 back into your original forms. Moon Jade, I carried the large sack on its back, and they both walked towards Southern Heavenly Gate. When they reached Southern Heavenly Gate, the 2 jade eyes paused for a moment before entering. Qin Mu couldn't help feeling nervous as he watched them. Suddenly, Sun Jade, I said, "Walking is too slow. Let's just roll." "Okay." Qin Mu widened his eyes and stared at the 2 jade eyes rolling into the depths of the celestial palace. He couldn't help breaking out in a cold sweat. Luckily, the sack didn't come apart. Unreliable, unreliable. Why are the fellows I summon always? Qin Mu froze. The 2 jade eyes rolled quickly and even punched each other to make the other one fly from time to time. Their happiness was beyond measure. Qin Mu's face turned black, and he kept wiping away his cold sweat. After some time, he couldn't see these 2 fellows anymore. He could only hear sounds of collision coming from the Southern Heavenly Gate, and sometimes he could see a huge ball flying up then down. The other jade, I must have kicked it into the sky. After waiting for a long time, he saw that the 2 jade eyes had arrived at God execution stage. Fierce aura overflowed from it as a kneeling man was about to be beheaded. The knife automatically moved up and down, chopping down on the neck of that kneeling man over and over again. His neck was almost severed, and he would be killed very soon. The 2 eyeballs looked at each other. It should be here, right? Is this person seeking death? If he's seeking death, we can't save him. Let's just go back. The 2 jade eyes rolled back down the mountain, and they suddenly stopped. Master said that he would beat us back into our original forms if we don't catalyze these medicine energy. We will die if we go back now. They rolled back again and jumped up the mountain until they reached God execution stage. Moon Jade, I opened the sack and took out a spirit pill. The 2 eyes executed chi of pure yin and chi of pure yang to catalyze it. After catalyzing over a dozen pills and destroying 7 to 8 pills, these 2 jade eyes got slightly impatient. Sun Jade, I suggested, "Why don't we catalyze them all at once? We'll tell Master that we have catalyzed them all. Okay. The two jade eyes opened their eyes wide in excitement. Two beams of light hit the sack. Ling Yuxiu was guarding beside First Ancestor Human Emperor, and she was getting slightly worried. It has been a long time since Qin Mu had transformed into a shadow and entered First Ancestor's divine treasures. Now that he still hasn't resurfaced, she didn't know if Qin Mu could successfully save First Ancestor. In addition to that, First Ancestor's aura was gradually becoming weaker. It was apparent that his injuries were becoming worse. Suddenly, Ling Yuxiu stood up. She stared hard at Pan Gongzhou, who was walking over. Pan Gongzhou's face was full of smiles, sauntering as he approached her. Princess Xiu, how is First Ancestor? I'm also skilled in the art of healing, so maybe I can help. Ling Yuxiu grabbed the small case and calmly said, You don't need to worry. Cowherd Boy's medical expertise is much better than yours. Shi walked from the other direction. He said calmly, Lassie little friend Qin's medical expertise sure is profound, but no matter how great it is, he cannot deliver the medicinal energy to the Celestial Palace. If things drag out, First Emperor Human Emperor will die for sure. Only I can enter his Celestial Palace and only I can save him. Clack. Ling Yuxiu opened a small gap in the case, and Shi's heart tightened. He became nervous as he stopped in his tracks. He pulled back his muscles, ready to fly far away to avoid God Execution mysterious knife. His other head looked at Pan Gongzhou. Pan Gongzhou then walked forward and stomped on the herb garden. He stepped all over the herbs and crushed them all. His aim was to distract Ling Yuxiu. There were many herbs that Qin Mu had planted to treat First Ancestor Human Emperor. If they were all destroyed, First Ancestor's injuries would be untreatable. Once Ling Yuxiu became distracted, she could then take the chance to steal the small case. When that time comes, they would be able to do anything to First Ancestor Human Emperor Ling Yuxiu and Qin Mu. Veins popped up on Ling Yuxiu's forehead as she continued to stare at Shi. She gritted her teeth, and she said in a low voice, Grandmaster, you are also a descendant of the races that founding emperor had left behind. Don't you have any gratitude? Pan Gongzhou was slightly stunned. With a smile that didn't reach his eyes, he said, I'm then the fiendish person that the world wants to get rid of. If First Ancestor Human Emperor knows there would be a descendant like me back then, you would definitely not save us at all. I'm not thankful at all. Shi threw a glance at him, and Pan Gongzhou hesitated. He didn't continue to walk forward. Pan Gongzhou went on to say, I've poisoned millions and millions of clansmen on the prairie, so how would I be thankful just for that righteous deed First Ancestor Human Emperor had done? I won't. Shi threw him another glance. Pan Gongzhou gritted his teeth and walked. Ling Yuxiu's gaze was still fixed on Shi, and she shouted sternly, Aren't you afraid that I'll use the God Execution knife to kill you? Pan Gongzhou's expression was complicated. He walked closer from behind her and slowly stretched his hands to grab the case from her hand. Ling Yuxiu couldn't endure this any longer. She kicked backward, hitting Pan Gongzhou's head and sending him sprawling across the ground. He promptly fainted. Useless thing. Shi was furious. Right after Ling Yuxiu kicked, he took this chance to kill her. Without any warning, First Ancestor sat up, alarming Shi. He immediately turned and vanished into the forest. I will save you. First Ancestor Human Emperor's complexion was sallow. He said softly, At that time, no matter how evil you are, I will save you. That's because you are the last of the human race. Pan Gongzhou opened his eyes and flipped to kneel in front of First Ancestor. He kowtowed several times heavily, and his body turned into a wisp of black smoke and left right away. Ling Yuxiu finally relaxed. She sat on the ground as her legs buckled. Looking at the direction where Pan Gongzhou had vanished, she said in a low voice, My kick couldn't have knocked him out. Could he still have some humanity left? At this moment, Qin Mu flew out from the heart of First Ancestor Human Emperor's brows. He said, Humanity? He might still have just a bit. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 650 Secrets of High Emperor. First Ancestor was still very weak. Even though the two huge eyeballs were very unreliable, they had actually succeeded in catalyzing all of the spirit pills in one go. The injuries of first ancestor human emperor's primordial spirit had been lessened, and he was able to escape from the God Execution knife on the God Execution stage. Of course, Qin Mu didn't know about this. If he did, he would definitely teach these two eyeballs a lesson. First ancestor stood up weakly, his body swaying. The injuries on his corporeal body were already healed, but his primordial spirit and celestial palace still had severe injuries. Luckily, his life was no longer in danger. Qi Shi's injuries are lighter than mine. His abilities are far above mine at the moment. First ancestor human emperor said in a weak voice, "I'm afraid I can't protect you." Qin Mu was unconcerned. Even if he knows you don't have many abilities, he won't dare to lay his hands on you. He doesn't dare to take a risk. When your injuries are fully healed, he won't dare to risk himself even more. First ancestor human emperor shook his head. I'm not worried about him. It's the floating world. Are you confident that you can heal me before we enter the floating world? Qin Mu hesitated. He indeed didn't have the confidence that he could heal first ancestor in a few months. The primordial spirit's injuries were extremely tricky, and he had no experience when it comes to injuries of the celestial palace. Furthermore, there weren't too many spirit herbs on this broken ship. Even though there was a variety of herbs in his Taotai sack, he still lacked some crucial herbs. If he wanted to heal first ancestor, he had to go to the floating world and see if he was able to buy enough spirit herbs. 3 forms of overturning heaven deals too much damage to you. You cannot use it from now on, Qin Mu instructed. First ancestor human emperor shook his head. I don't want to let heavenly teacher think I'm still an army deserter. Qin Mu was stunned. Just because he was once an army deserter, he had to carry the foul reputation of being an army deserter forever. It was indeed a little cruel. The reason why heavenly teacher said you are an army deserter might not be because you have run away from that battle. Qin Mu thought over it, and he deduced Saint Woodcutter's intention. After you have become an army deserter, you continued to run for 20,000 years and never once did you face reality. You went into seclusion and shunned away from the mortal world. You wasted your time away and didn't work hard for anything or do anything successfully. You even didn't teach your disciple properly. He won't bear a grudge just because you have run away once. It's how you have run away for 20,000 years that he cannot forgive. First ancestor human emperor fell into a daze. Qin Mu didn't speak again. He looked at the herb garden that had been trampled. These herbs could still be grown with Earth Aeon creation technique, but he still lacked numerous herbs. His Taotai sack bulged here and there as the 2 jade eyes rolled around. Qin Mu let out these 2 jade eyes, and they landed on the ground. They put their scrawny hands on the sides of their eyes and walked around to examine their surroundings. Brother, there's a babe. Moon Jade Eye threw a glance at Ling Yuxiu and said excitedly, It's one of the 2 babes that had found us. The 2 eyeballs lighted up as they ogled Ling Yuxiu relentlessly. When they had their fill, only then were they satisfied. Ling Yuxiu examined these 2 eyeballs in astonishment. She carefully walked around them, then stopped beside Qin Mu. 10,000 spirit nature technique? Qin Mu nodded. Why have you awakened their spirit? Ling Yuxiu said in a low voice. These 2 eyeballs are very powerful. Even ordinary gods can't block their gaze. If they rebelled, we can't restrain them at all. By the way, do they know they're very powerful? Qin Mu shook his head and whispered, They don't know. They're still worried I would smack them back into their original forms. Ling Yuxiu let out a sigh of relief. She recalled something and asked again, Do they know they are the eyes of a Taotai? After you've awakened the chest, he was like a Taotai that likes to eat anything. He even treated the dragon Qilin as a corpse and ate him several times. Qin Mu shook his head. I don't know as well. They're very innocent. The 2 jade eyes rolled here and there as they chattered. They didn't know what they were gossiping about. Ling Yuxiu approached them and said with a smile, From now on, you will be called Xiaoyang, and you will be called Xiaoyin. Okay? Okay. The 2 jade eyes said in unison, Babe! Ling Yuxiu returned to Qin Mu's side, and she whispered, These two-eye monsters don't look that innocent. They called me babe just now. The two eyes ran into a dense forest. After a moment, the forest caught on fire. Ling Yuxiu frantically stuffed the small case to Qin Mu, and she ran towards the burning trees. Her vital qi transformed into water dragons, extinguishing the fire in an instant. The two huge eye monsters stood there, looking very pleased. I told you we could lure the babe with this method, right? Brother is indeed smart. Ling Yuxiu was livid. The young girl wasted no time as she dragged the scrawny legs of these two eye monsters and chucked them in front of Qin Mu. These two rascals almost burned the whole forest down. If you burn this place, we're all going to die miserably. Just smack them back into their original forms and save us from the trouble. Great Aunt, please spare our lives. The two huge eyeballs knelt on the ground, their eyes facing the floor. Qin Mu was troubled. I still need them to deliver medicine to First Ancestor's celestial palace, so I can't kill them yet. I'll write down this debt first. If you two cause trouble again, off with your heads. Ling Yuxiu roared. The two eye monsters huddled together, and their eyes were filled with fear. We don't seem to have heads. Shut up. She hasn't discovered that we don't have heads. If you remind her, she's going to poke our eyes blind. Qin Mu left them and continued to refine medicine. When the medicinal energy in First Ancestor Human Emperor's body was depleted, he got the two eye monsters to go on another trip while he went to the stern of the ship. He examined the blood that Great Sun Sovereign had left behind in detail. Great Sun Sovereign was severely injured, and the god blood that dripped from him immediately burst into flames when it flowed on the ship. First Ancestor's sword qi eventually extinguished the fire, but the divine might in the god blood was still there. There were fine runes that kept appearing from time to time, and they looked very marvelous. Qin Mu didn't dare to touch it. At this moment, First Ancestor Human Emperor hobbled towards him. He pulled out his sword and offered it Qin Mu. Use this sword and try. Qin Mu took Jade Brightness sword. It was his first time examining this treasure. Jade Brightness sword was a sword of a prince that was used to guard Jade Brightness sword. Its power was extraordinarily terrifying, and the body of the entire sword was incomparably bright as though it was a sword-shaped light. The light hummed as though there was no fixed length. It was evident that the craftsmanship of this sword was extremely high. This standard of craftsmanship was a height that not even Mute could reach at the moment. Suddenly, Qin Mu took out Carefree sword and compared it with Jade Brightness sword. Carefree sword looked much simpler. There was no divine might to be seen, and it wasn't as bright as Jade Brightness sword. Carefree sword was like an ordinary divine weapon that was forged from ordinary divine metal. There was no flaunting of any profound craftsmanship. This sword of yours. First Ancestor Human Emperor's mind trembled slightly. Let me take a look. Qin Mu handed Carefree sword to him. First Ancestor Human Emperor examined the sword over and over again. After a moment, he had a dazed and dimmed look on his face as he asked in a hoarse voice, "Who gave it to you?" "My father." Qin Mu dipped the tip of Jade Brightness sword and lifted a huge blob of Great Sun Sovereign's god blood. Layers of formation swirled in his eyes as he examined this blob of god blood with bright heaven's eyes. He had signed a pact of Earth Count with Saturn Sovereign, so he can't see me. He gave me this sword as a token of remembrance. First Ancestor Human Emperor asked, "Do you know the name of this sword?" "Carefree sword. When I got this sword, I saw the word carefree appear on the sword." Qin Mu carefully tapped on Sun Sovereign's god blood. Jade Brightness sword suppressed the divine might of the god blood. However, with this tap, that small blob of god blood immediately expanded and transformed into a blood ball that had a radius of 3 yards. Qin Mu's 5 fingers tapped gently, and his fingers tapped on the blood ball one after another. This blood ball expanded continuously and became bigger and bigger until it finally transformed into a huge spinning blood ball that was 100 yards. Carefree sword. First Ancestor Human Emperor gave a gentle smile and said softly, "It's now called Carefree sword." "That's right. It's indeed carefree now." Qin Mu gathered his focus, and the formations in his eyes swirled furiously to see even the tiniest atom in this blood ball. First ancestor, this great sun sovereign isn't the true great sun sovereign. He is the same as you. He is also a human that had cultivated into a god. Qin Mu suddenly said, "Take a look. His blood is actually human blood. A god that's born from a sun shouldn't have the blood of a human. Strange rune markings are imprinted in his blood, and every finest blood molecule was imprinted with intricate fine runes. This kind of runes should be a kind of fire rune or pure yang runes." First ancestor human emperor said, "My primordial spirit is weak, and I still can't execute my divine eyes. Describe this rune and let me see." Qin Mu scattered the blood ball, and it rapidly shrank, turning back into a blob of blood. He then flicked the sword, and the blob of blood landed on the ground. With his vital qi as the tip of a brush, he visualized the rune he had seen in the air. The rune was a kind of strange marking that looked complicated. It seemed to contain the markings of all kinds of fire attribute divine beasts. However, it was completely the same, and this was the reason why Qin Mu couldn't see if it was a fire rune or a pure yang rune. It's a rune of High Emperor era. It's different from the fire rune and pure yang rune of founding emperor era. First ancestor human emperor examined it in detail and said, "Heavenly teacher has in-depth research in this field, but I didn't learn much from him. Still, I can confirm that this great sun sovereign is indeed a human that had cultivated into a god. He isn't the true great sun sovereign." They met each other's eyes with grim expressions. Qin Mu muttered, "In that case, why did a god of High Emperor era become great sun sovereign? Where's the true great sun sovereign?" She said High Emperor era had existed for 300,000 years, much longer than any era. Why could this era last so long? First ancestor human emperor was still slightly weak as he returned carefree sword to him. He said while gasping for his breath, "During the early period of founding emperor era, there were also ruins of High Emperor era, but the break in civilization was very severe and even founding emperor couldn't deduce what had happened during High Emperor era. If one wants to know about the secrets of High Emperor era, one would need to return to the past. This era is probably much more complicated than what you think." Qin Mu was stunned. He remembered that inconceivable time travel that he had experienced with Pangongtso. He also remembered Bai Chuer and thought to himself, "Back to the past? I have gone back once. This carefree sword, protect it carefully. You must not lose it." First ancestor human emperor added, "Protect it even if it risks your life. It's very valuable." Qin Mu stroked the carefree sword, and he nodded his head. "I will. This is the only thing my father has given to me. I won't lose it no matter what. This point is very strange, first ancestor. I can barely unleash a bit of power from your Jade Brightness sword, yet I can never activate the power of this sword. Why is that?" First ancestor wanted to say something, but he stopped himself. He didn't say the reason and only said, "You will know in the future."